Story 1.
I cheated and lost my husband's trust completely. He won to even let me touch him anymore. Help! I'm in a unique situation and want to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I'm not the wounded person here. My husband, kids, and parents bear the burden of my past mistakes, for which I am genuinely sorry. Let me be straightforward. About 19 months ago, I was caught having an affair with a married neighbor and father of 3. I'm a 32-year-old woman, my husband is 39, and the neighbor, whom I'll call Steve for confidentiality, was 27 at the time. I made a terrible mistake having the affair with Steve, which began a little over 2 years ago. While the affair lasted nearly 5 months before being exposed, I was physically with Steve only 4 times in total. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear it's true. Well, let me tell you something, I don't believe it. To address questions about my marriage that I'm sure everyone reading this has, were we having issues? Did I not love my husband? Was I unhappy? The answer is a definite no to all those questions. I was completely content and fulfilled in my marriage, and I love my husband and our 2 boys, ages 9 and 11, more than anything in the world. Jim satisfied me emotionally, mentally, and physically. He was everything I ever dreamed of and more. My attraction to Steve was misplaced and stemmed from a deep place that took me back to my first romantic encounter at 18. It was a wild attraction, just like my first time. It was like a wild animal instinct inside me that drove me to this. In high school, I dated 4 boys, but nothing serious beyond a quick kiss at the end of the night. In fact, I considered all those guys as friends since we all grew up together. One day, I was invited to a barbecue at a friend's parents' place where I met Charles. Charles was my friend's cousin, and from the first time I saw him, I was captivated, I was taken. At the time, he was 20 and I was 18. From the moment we met, we couldn't keep our eyes off each other. I don't know what it was, but there was something between us that drew me to him like a magnet to steel or a magnet to metal. We started talking at the barbecue and he had to leave for work, so we exchanged numbers. The next day, on Sunday, we met for ice cream in the evening and took a walk. We talked for hours, totally engrossed with each other, and just spontaneously started kissing. He invited me back to his apartment, and there I had my first experience. Something about Charles excited me and made me want to give him every part of me. To this day, I can't describe it. It was subconscious. I couldn't resist. Beyond the physical relationship, we had nothing in common. In fact, we were incompatible. I ended things with Charles 11 months later, after the passion wore off. A year later, I met my now husband Jim. He checked all my boxes, and I knew he was the one. We got married a year later, and our marriage had been 13 years of joy until I ruined it. We were blessed with 2 wonderful boys who are the spitting image of their dad and share his awesome personality. I'm sharing these details to explain why I started a relationship with Steve. Steve and his wife Marcia moved into our neighborhood, and they were the youngest couple. My husband and I are the second youngest, with the others mostly in their 60s. Everyone warmly welcomed Steve and Marcia. They were invited to a neighborhood picnic where Steve and I first noticed each other, similar to when I first met Charles at a family barbecue a long time ago. The next time I saw Steve was at the car dealership where he worked in finance. We were looking for a new SUV, and when my husband found out Steve worked there, they started talking. We went the next week to check out cars. Steve made sure we got a good deal, and he arranged great financing. Throughout the closing process, Steve and I exchanged glances, but my husband didn't notice. A few days later, I had to bring the vehicle back for mud flaps, and that's when Steve and I had our first inappropriate meeting. He greeted me in the lounge, and then, in his office, he mentioned additional financing details. We chatted, and he confessed he wanted to talk to me alone about his feelings. I admitted I felt something too, but it was wrong. He knew it was wrong but didn't care. He wanted me. Fast forward to the next morning, when we had our first close encounter at his house after our kids went to school and our spouses left for work. By the way, my husband has a good job, and Marcia is a licensed practical nurse. Steve and I only had physical relations 4 times in the entire 5-month period. There was no love connection, as I loved Jim, and Steve loved Marcia. What we had was just physical, and to be honest, it wasn't as good as what I had with my husband, not even close. But it was forbidden, and therefore thrilling and dangerous. Looking back now, being a stay-at-home mom for 11 years made me desperate for attention from this attractive younger man. I thought I could have this secret adventure and still maintain a loving marriage with my husband. That idea came crashing down one Thursday morning 19 months ago, when Steve and I were caught in bed at his house by Marcia's mother. She walked in on us fully engaged and started screaming obscenities. She slapped and scratched Steve, leaving a large gash with her nails. She also hit me square on the jaw and pulled out 2 handfuls of my hair before I could gather my clothes and leave the house. When I got home, I was completely shocked by what had just happened, and the reality of my actions sank in. I realized my perfect marriage to Jim was forever changed and could end because of this. I sat silently for a couple of hours, just staring at the walls, wondering how to tell my husband. Eventually, I decided to call him and left an urgent message stating that I had something very important to discuss. He didn't respond. So I texted him but still got no reply. A few minutes later, Marcia and her mother showed up on our front porch, knocking on the door and bay windows, screaming for me to answer. Terrified and thoroughly embarrassed, I didn't respond. Luckily, my boys were at school when this happened. After they left, I lay down on the couch, crying. I briefly fell asleep but woke up to the sound of a car door in the driveway. I looked out and saw my husband. I rushed to freshen up before going back into the living room to greet him. When he opened the door, however, he didn't enter. Instead, I saw through the window that he was walking down the street towards Steve and Marcia's house. I watched as he spent nearly 3 hours there before coming home. I went to hug him, but he kept me away. I started apologizing, but he said my apology wasn't accepted and he wanted me to leave. I fell to the floor, crying and begging, telling him I didn't want to go, but he insisted. He then called my mother, explained what I'd done, and asked her to come over and pick me up. Mom came over, apologized to Steve, convinced me to go back to her house for the night, and helped me pack some clothes. I left, crying, asking Jim what he would tell the kids. He said he would take care of it. I left, broken-hearted and ashamed. That night, I called Jim, and to my surprise, he answered. He just said hello and went silent. I identified myself, apologized, and promised never to do something like this again. I expressed my commitment to spend the rest of my life making it up to him. Jim remained silent, asking if I had anything more to say. I said no and asked him about his feelings. He told me he knew what he was feeling, and I started crying. He then said he wanted me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before coming home. I reluctantly agreed, but asked when I would get to see him and the boys again. He said he didn't want to see me now, but agreed to a brief call every evening at 9. The first call ended with me saying I love you, and Jim saying nothing, just hanging up. The next night's call went the same way, with me apologizing and Jim staying silent until I stopped talking. He then dropped a bomb, saying he wanted a divorce. Hearing this, I broke down and begged him for another chance. He refused, acknowledging he'd lose half his hard-earned assets. Then he unexpectedly said he'd give me everything he owns if I just disappeared and left him and the boys alone. I broke down again, insisting he didn't mean that, but he affirmed that he did. We ended the call, and I cried all night. I then started thinking of how I could make him stay and came up with a plan to offer him a post-nuptial agreement so favorable he couldn't refuse it. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love, regardless of the cost. The following week, while Jim met with his divorce attorney, I consulted my own lawyer, not to prepare for divorce, but to create a post-nuptial agreement to present to Jim before receiving the divorce papers. I visited 4 different attorneys before finding one who specialized in post-nuptial agreements and was willing to create such a lopsided agreement. Lopsided in that my husband would receive nearly all the benefit in exchange for remaining married to me for a period, giving me a second chance at love. Unfortunately, Jim's lawyer completed the divorce papers in just 11 days, and I was served at my parents' house 2 days later. I had Jim served with the proposed postnuptial agreement. We talked that night after he read the proposal. He was a bit surprised at what I had offered, and for the first time, I could sense the caring person I once knew coming through, not the angry man who had been so robotic and cold for the past 2 weeks. The agreement is a complete win for Jim, and an opportunity for me to prove I'm worth keeping. I won't go into specific details about the postnuptial, but I can confirm that it allows Jim to keep nearly all our marital assets if we stay married and live together for at least 30 months. Also, if I'm unfaithful again and we divorce, I lose all claims on our marital assets, get nothing, and forego any alimony and child support payments. The agreement also requires me to get a full-time job within the next 6 months and contribute to our household expenses. Finally, my husband can see other women if he chooses throughout the remainder of our marriage. I know Jim would never be unfaithful, it's not in him, but I want him to know I love him enough to give him this option. To my surprise and delight, Jim accepted the offer with one additional stipulation. The clause Jim wanted added stated there is no requirement for us to sleep together or have any type of cohabitation coitus during the remainder of our marriage. I was saddened and hesitant to agree to this, but I finally did, feeling that with time I could win back his respect, trust, and passionate love. Things have not gone as I thought, and that's why I'm here. We are now 17.5 months into our second marriage, as I call it, and our relationship is one of being housemates raising our boys. Don't get me wrong, I thank God every day for the second chance I've been given. But what we have wouldn't qualify as a marriage. It's more like we are 2 divorced people cohabitating. Since my affair, Jim has shown absolutely no affection towards me whatsoever. I mean nothing. not even a kiss or a hug. He won't even let me near him to express any type of affection, although I do get in for a hug and a kiss occasionally before he can block me, but I can tell he doesn't like it, so I don't do it very often. Even so, he requires me to submit monthly to AT, home STD testing. Also, since the affair, Jim will not go out in public with me, even to family events. When our boys have games, we alternate who takes them. When it's my turn, Jim shows up at the games but doesn't sit with me. Instead, he normally stands on the sidelines with other fathers and acts like I'm not there. The only time we go out together is when we go out of town or on vacations, which we do often. When we travel, he orders adjoining rooms with 2 queen beds each. The boys stay in one room, and we stay in the other in separate beds. I look forward to every trip, as these are the times we are closest and where I've almost been able to break through to him. I told Jim about this and suggested we move from our neighborhood to start fresh. However, Jim said he'd only move if he gets a job promotion requiring relocation otherwise. He plans to stay until our boys finish high school. The boys also don't want to move because all their friends live nearby, as do Jim's friends. Since the affair, I lost all my friendships in the neighborhood. Steve and Marcia divorced 8 months after D-Day, but Marcia and her kids still live down the street. The neighborhood women I was once close to cut me off, blaming me for breaking up the family. Now my home feels like a prison, and I rarely go outside, staying inside or in my backyard, tending to my gardens. My boys are often out with their friends in the neighborhood, including Marcia and Steve's kids, but thankfully, their world hasn't changed much. Jim follows a similar routine, hanging out with neighborhood men, smoking cigars, and sipping bourbon at night, either at our house or theirs. After work, the guys enjoy relaxing together. Jim goes to work, hits the gym, and then comes home, usually avoiding the dinner I make. On weekends, he grills and only eats what he cooks, not my dishes. Weekday dinners with my boys have become a great bonding experience. We eat around 4 when they get home from school, setting the table, helping with final food prep and cleaning up together. This time has brought us closer, teaching valuable skills even in the garden, where we've created an awesome space. In summary, some things in my life are great, while others are awful. I'm unsure whether this marriage is worth continuing in its current state, or if I should let Jim go now and provide financial benefits. Deep down, I know he's not happy, and no longer sees me as his wife or lover, just as a CO parent. I love Jim a lot and will carry the burden of what I did for the rest of my life. I want to return to the loving relationship we once had, but I doubt he'll allow it. Please let me know what you think I should do. I'd appreciate any suggestions on how to successfully earn back my husband's love and trust after betraying him so brazenly. Thank you, Amy. Update. Last month, I followed the advice and decided to temporarily move out of the house to give our marriage some space. I rented a furnished apartment nearby and have been living there since. While I miss being with my husband and boys, and I miss my gardens, it's a relief to be away from that neighborhood. There are too many bad memories and vibes there, all of which I know are my fault. I'm not making excuses for what I did. When I told Jim about my decision, he seemed surprised and a bit saddened, asking many questions. His reaction showed me a lot, indicating that he still loves me. I could see it in his eyes. I pick up my boys after school, and they come over to my apartment for dinner and spend the night a few days a week. Jim and I are flexible about it, and the kids can come and go freely between our places. The main challenge now is that being out of the house means I don't see Jim much, and I'm not in a position to talk to him. So I end up calling him, asking silly questions multiple times a week just to stay connected. We've had several lengthy conversations about various things recently, another sign that he still loves me. I know I love him. That's all for now. Thanks and take care. Update. What a journey. Life is like a roller coaster with its ups and downs. Unfortunately, after 2 years into our second marriage, Jim decided that it's best for us to get a divorce. Jim mentioned that he still loves me and might want to rekindle a romantic relationship in the future, but he believes it's challenging to do while we're married. He explained it's something psychological. He feels disrespected and betrayed while still married, but thinks he can let go of those feelings after the divorce. Jim suggested we celebrate our divorce once it's final, possibly even spending the night together. While it might sound like a strange way to part with guilt, I'm willing to go along with it if it means keeping Jim in my life as a partner, lover, and friend. Jim made it clear that even if we reconnect, we won't get remarried. He believes a binding contract isn't necessary if we truly love each other. I agree with that, but I do wish there was a way to do this without divorcing. Regarding the divorce, I've decided to let him keep 3/4 of our marital assets voluntarily, despite him not meeting the postnup stipulations. I won't pursue alimony or child support. Some may criticize me for being generous, but I believe he earned the money and would have given it all to me if I had remained faithful. I'm at peace with this decision and can live comfortably for the next 8 years or more without working. Currently, I am working, so things are even better financially. I want to offer advice to women struggling with temptation as I have. My suggestion is to resist it. The thrill is not worth the risk. If you find it challenging to control yourself, seek professional help. From my experience, the short-term high is not worth the long-term loss of love, respect, and trust. I'm a 32-year-old guy married to Kat. We've been together for the past 2 years, dating for 2 years before getting married. Recently, things have not been going well between us. The trouble started 2 months ago when my wife suggested we open up our marriage to add excitement. I was surprised by her suggestion. I never thought she'd bring it up. I want to clarify that I'm not trying to control her, but given our history, it's tough for me to believe she's interested in trying this. Let's face it, open marriage is risky and often ends up hurting one or both partners. I told her clearly that I'm not comfortable with an open marriage. It's not that I'm against trying new things or spicing up our married life, but I want those things to stay within the boundaries of a closed marriage, with no third person involved. She was disappointed because it's rare for me to deny her something. I love her a lot and usually go along with her requests, even if it means making compromises. Although she didn't say anything after our conversation, I could sense that she was not happy about it. I wanted to get to the bottom of the situation and understand her reasoning. I began questioning my abilities in bed. I wanted to talk to her, but she remained silent. Kat is a consultant with a busy work schedule, often working in different time zones, which disrupts her work-life balance. While I also have a hectic work schedule, it doesn't require me to go beyond our time zone, making it easier for me. Due to her work schedule, I couldn't discuss my concerns with her. I blamed myself for impulsively saying no to her. I should have asked for more information before making a decision. I felt terrible. Nearly 2 weeks later, I got home early from work one day and made her favorite meal for dinner. She was happy with my gesture. We hugged and spent quality time together. I took that opportunity to ask her about her suggestion for an open marriage. She immediately became frustrated, accusing me of playing mind games. I didn't trick her. I just wanted to spend time with her and understand her perspective on open marriage. That's it. I got upset with her accusations and asked her directly if I was not meeting her needs. After that, she opened up. She told me about interns in her office who are fresh out of college and in their early 20s. They party a lot and hook up whenever they can. Their adventurous stories planted the idea of an open marriage in her mind. She admitted to feeling a fear of missing out when her young colleagues talked about their exciting lives. I listened to her and understood her point of view. It's natural for people to be influenced by tempting things. I told her I'm not comfortable with the idea of an open marriage because I cherish our relationship. Our bond means a lot to me. Before I met Kat, I also lived a wild life in my 20s, doing the same things as others, but I went through the emotional challenges that everyone does. Excitement can fade, leaving behind emptiness. Finding comfort in Kat after meeting her, I didn't want to go back to my old life. We got married, and she was the one I envisioned a family and growing old with. I openly shared my thoughts on open marriage with her, suggesting we reconsider if she was genuinely interested. However, she immediately denied it, though she seemed to understand. I thought she agreed with my opinion during our conversation, but I was mistaken. Everything seemed normal for a few days, but after about a week, her behavior changed drastically. She started acting cold, attributing it to work stress. Recently, she's been behaving terribly, throwing tantrums over trivial things and mocking me as outdated. When I asked her about it, she explained that I'm too stubborn in sticking to my beliefs and not keeping up with trends. I questioned what she meant by following the trend, as I stay updated with fashion, music, and web series. I asked if my reluctance for an open marriage upset her, and she simply nodded, leaving me confused. Throughout this time, her work schedule became busier with more late nights. Initially, it was only a few days a month, but now she's coming home late almost every other day, sometimes even at dawn. When I confronted her, she mentioned aiming for a promotion, proving her worth for the position. While I admire her ambition, I worry about the truth. Honestly, I'm hesitant to entertain negative thoughts or jump to conclusions. Yesterday, something happened that prompted me to share my feelings and seek advice from the community. I reached home earlier than usual and decided to prepare Kat's favorite lasagna for dinner. Despite her late-night plans, I wanted to surprise her. I messaged her, and she responded that she'd be late, maybe after midnight, dampening my enthusiasm. I spent the next hour playing video games, hungry but wanting to have dinner with Kat. An urge led me to pick her up from the office, something I'd never done before unless we had plans after work. Thinking it would be a nice surprise, I rushed to her office, a standalone building easy to spot, waiting outside for 30 to 45 minutes. It was 12:30 a.m., but there was no sign of Kat. Worried, I went upstairs to inquire at the reception. The office was still bustling with night shift employees, and the receptionist informed me that Kat had already left. I regretted the idea and drove back home, only to find she wasn't there either. Concerned for her safety, cheating was the last thing on my mind. I was more worried about her well-being. It was too late to reach out to any of Kat's work friends, and since she had only joined the company 6 months ago, I didn't have their contact information. I felt unsure about what to do. Exhausted and anxious, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up with the first light of the sun, I hurried to my room on impulse. I found Kat comfortably sleeping in bed. I rushed to her, tucked her in, and went back to sleep. In the morning, she was already getting ready for work. I asked when she had come home last night, and she mentioned it was around 3 a.m. due to a busy day at work, including a meeting with an Asian client. Curious, I inquired about when she left the office, and she casually said around 2:30 a.m., leaving me shocked. Her response raised concerns. Either the receptionist gave me incorrect information about Kat not being at the office around 12:30 a.m., or Kat was lying about being there until 2:30 a.m. Still feeling dizzy from the previous night's stress, I didn't press further. She called me in the afternoon, asking if I had been to her office. The receptionist had informed her about my midnight visit. I wondered about the receptionist's unusual working hours, but explained why I had gone to her office. She was silent for a moment, then clarified that she had left her office in the afternoon for a meeting at her client's U.S. office in another part of the city. This explained why she wasn't in her office when I checked. I was puzzled by her explanation. She elaborated that her client was an Asian company with a U.S. office where she participated in Zoom calls with employees in the Asian time zone. Despite this being a common practice worldwide, I felt confused about my own situation. I'm at a loss and don't know what to do next. Should I wait for things to settle or confront Kat again with my doubts? I've confronted her multiple times in the past. Any suggestions or advice would be appreciated. Update: I received some shocking news. Please bear with me as I vent. I attempted various ways to access Kat's emails or her phone's password, but she kept it very private. I tried hard to come up with ideas to uncover the truth, but I didn't succeed. In the last 2 weeks, Kat continued to come home late from work, and we were both giving each other the cold shoulder, with very few occasional and transactional conversations. 2 days ago, she was talking to her mom, who has been dealing with kidney problems for the past few years, and her recent blood test results were not good. While she was on the bed talking to her mom, I, out of concern, took her phone to check on her mom. While she narrated her tiresome routine of tests and medicine, something clicked in my head. I peeked at the unlocked phone screen with chat notifications. I got up, walked into the room while talking to her mom, casually entered the washroom while on the phone, and locked the door. I put the phone on speaker, pretended to listen, and read the messages through the notification. The notification revealed that Kat was supposed to meet someone that day for a fun ride. I opened her social media messages, and you were right, she was having an affair. She was involved with these inexperienced coworkers. After a couple of minutes, she realized I took her phone into the washroom, and she started knocking on the door to get it back. I didn't have enough time to read all the conversations, so I quickly scanned her gallery for concrete proof. The gallery was filled with explicit pictures of my beautiful wife in compromising positions with her CO workers. I emailed those pictures to myself and deleted the history. She's cheating on me with multiple colleagues. I felt so sick that I wanted to throw up. Meanwhile, my wife kept knocking on the door, asking for her phone back. I couldn't stand to hear her nagging voice. I unlocked the door, swiftly handed her the phone, and locked the washroom again. Initially, I wanted to rush out and confront her right away, but instead I calmed myself down and let the anger pass. The chat notifications contained details about the location and the time they were supposed to meet that day. Leaving the washroom, I grabbed the car keys and drove to that location. While leaving the house, she faintly called my name, but I didn't bother to turn back. At the hotel, I chose the darkest table in the lobby, not to cause a scene, but to observe how comfortable she was on her way to cheat. She was supposed to be there at 5 p.m., and I arrived at 3, downing countless shots by 5. I had initially hoped to confront her at home, but God knows what I was thinking. Maybe too numb and unready for a face-off. Not even in the lobby. By 6, she didn't show up. I thought she might have sensed my presence and changed the location. Nevertheless, I was too drunk and drained to think clearly. I sat there, continuing to drink. Around 7, I saw Kat. At that sight, my world crumbled. My vision blurred after 4 hours of drinking. I faintly remembered what happened next. Reacting in autopilot mode, I got up, staggered to the reception area where she was registering her entry, tapped her on the shoulder, and said, "Good luck with your fun ride." I might have said more, but this is the summarized version. She held my hand, attempting to explain, but I don't recall her words. I do remember shrugging her off, freeing my arms from her grasp, and storming out of the hotel. I hailed a cab to my friend's place and passed out at his door. The next thing I remember is waking up on my friend's couch yesterday afternoon. I slept for 16 hours straight. It was Sunday afternoon. My friend Lee made me some lunch along with fresh lemonade. I poured out my entire story to him. He advised me to freeze joint accounts, change passwords, and get an STD check immediately. For someone betrayed so badly, money and all these privacy checks were the least of my concerns. I reached out to my dead phone, plugged it in, and switched it on. The screen flooded with notifications, 100 missed calls, 50 voicemails, and countless pleading messages. I ignored it all. After a few minutes, calls and messages from her started again. I blocked her on all platforms. I felt so disgusted that I didn't even read her messages and emails completely. Today is Monday. I've called in sick for the next few days at my office. I don't know how to deal with this. I've been drinking heavily and want to run away from all of this. I don't know what to do now. My friend is searching for some of the best lawyers in the vicinity. Update, I recommended securing our shared accounts, changing passwords for sensitive information, and getting tested for STDs. Thankfully, the test results were negative. Lee assisted me in finding a lawyer, and I shared all the pictures from Kat's phone with him. I temporarily settled with Lee until the divorce is finalized, which worked out well since he needed a roommate. Throughout this time, Kat has been trying to reach me, pleading for us to get back together and start anew. She also contacted Lee, asking for his help in reconciling our marriage. According to her, the hookups were meaningless, and she was just exploring her desires, wanting to feel attractive. I'm uncertain about these Gen Z concepts of desirability and whether the whole idea is genuine or not. A few days after my last update, I sent Lee to my house with keys to collect my belongings, hoping Kat would be at the office on a regular workday. However, Lee found her at home, where she broke down and sought his help. Lee was clever enough to inform her that I was staying in a hotel, not at his place, to avoid any potential drama. Kat informed Lee that she had quit her job, revealing that it all began when interns at work started flirting with her. They made her feel desired and beautiful again, leading her to try various experiences, including illicit ones. Initially, it was a one-time thing, but she later became dependent on the thrill. Since the interns didn't make enough money, they relied on Kat to cover their expenses. She eventually realized they were taking advantage of her financially, but by then, she was already immersed in that lifestyle. When Lee questioned why she didn't confess earlier, Kat claimed she had spoken to me about opening up the marriage due to guilt. However, my refusal to agree prevented her from confessing anything to me. I find it confusing. What's the point of asking for an open marriage after cheating on me? Kat is resisting signing the divorce papers and blaming me for motivating her night stands, but she can't provide evidence for her false claims. Now she's seeking alimony, citing mental distress caused by the divorce. If anyone deserves compensation, it's me, as I had to endure the terrible feelings of betrayal. Later that month, Kat's sister Amy, name changed, contacted me, pleading for reconciliation. She shared how Kat is going through tough times, leading to severe depression due to the interns damaging her reputation at the office. They circulated compromising pictures of Kat having fun with them to other senior employees, mocking her as an easy target. This gossip made her the center of attention at the office, forcing her to leave. Senior employees spread the gossip outside the office network, making it difficult for Kat to get referrals. I reminded Amy that Kat chose to leave our stable married life for a thrilling experience, and now she has to face the consequences. Anyways, I'm moving forward with my life. I've kept my drinking habits in check, focused on working out, eating healthy, and staying busy at work. The divorce proceedings are ongoing despite Kat's resistance. It got delayed, but my lawyer assures me that it will wrap up soon.
Story 2.
My wife was furious when I got a 6-figure promotion after exposing her affair with him to our CEOs. I've put in a lot of effort to reach my current position in life. I'm on the verge of becoming a millionaire, and it's all because I worked my way up the corporate ladder. I also developed a close friendship with my boss. On top of that, I have a wonderful wife. Everything in my life was going smoothly until I discovered that my wife was cheating on me. What's even worse is that the reason I'm getting promotions at work is because she's having an affair with my boss. The situation took a turn for the worse when I decided to expose their relationship at one of our company's major annual events, attended by all employees, including the billionaire owner. It's a crazy situation. Hello, my name is John, and I'm currently facing an extremely stressful situation. My life used to be quite simple, with a fulfilling career and a loving relationship. I grew up as the only child of my parents, and I was fortunate to witness their deep love for each other. My father worked diligently as an office clerk, while my mother took on various jobs, although nothing stable financially. We were doing fine. We had a home, which my mother had acquired as part of our inheritance. That was pretty much my background. I didn't live a lavish life, but I received love from some of the top colleges in the country. I have vivid memories of the day I received my scholarship letter. And those colleges never made me feel like I was from a less privileged background. I attended a public school and excelled academically. After completing my schooling, I earned a scholarship for my master's in business. My parents were extremely proud of me, and at 18 years old, I headed off to college, living far away from them. I must admit, I missed them a lot. College turned out to be emotionally challenging for me because that's where I realized the significance of money. Many of my peers had a lot of it. I discovered certain unspoken rules that govern the world we live in, rules I hadn't been aware of until I got to college. You could only gain entry into the best clubs if you were popular. Popularity often hinged on having an attractive girlfriend, wealth, and possessing a cool car to buy gifts for her. Essentially, life boiled down to having money, which I didn't have much of, except for the allowance my father sent me for books and emergencies. My education was fully funded, and I never asked for more. However, at a young age, I made a firm decision that I wanted to become wealthy, so that my future children wouldn't just have love and abundance, but also a substantial amount of money. When there aren't any distractions, you tend to focus on your studies. That's exactly what I did. I dedicated myself to studying diligently and eventually secured a pretty decent job with one of the biggest corporations as an entry-level executive. Although the pay was higher than what you'd typically get at an entry level, I felt a sense of pride in how far I had come. With my first paycheck, I purchased tickets for my parents to visit me in New York, where I currently reside. I didn't have a lot of money to show them around or treat them to a fancy dinner, but I still wanted them to see how well I was doing. They stayed with me in my rented apartment, which I shared with a colleague from my office. I was proud of my accomplishments and wanted them to see my new life. Things were going well for me. Within a year, I had been promoted to a team leader. I managed to secure a rented apartment where I could live on my own, and life was actually quite enjoyable. That's when I had the pleasure of meeting my next-door neighbor, Sarah. She was the most stunning woman I had ever seen. When you've gone without a girlfriend for a long time, you can become a bit apprehensive about making the first move. I was lucky because one day she took the initiative and invited me over for coffee at her place. I was overjoyed and tried to contain my excitement, but I couldn't help but smile and accept her invitation with enthusiasm, saying, "Sure." Our love story with Sarah began, and we quickly started dating. After another promotion and becoming the head of my department, I proposed to her, and she said yes. Life was better than I could have imagined. We planned a summer wedding with close friends and family, and both sets of parents blessed our union. Just 4 years after college, I had a great, well-paying job in New York, and I was married. It felt surreal. Over the next 2 years, I focused on my career, aiming to provide for my future family and buy a house before having kids. Sarah supported my career, never complaining about the time I couldn't spend with her. We believed in climbing the corporate ladder as newlyweds. I became friends with my boss, Mike, who happens to be the CEO of our company. It's impressive that he achieved such success at a young age, even though he's only in his late 30s. He's also married to Emily. The four of us became close friends, which helped me achieve my goals more quickly. Sarah was also busy pursuing her dream as a fashion designer, making strides towards success. We both had hectic lives but enjoyed our marriage. Despite coming home late every night, we always waited for each other to have dinner together. I was getting closer to my goals and planned to discuss having children with Sarah in the next 6 months. That night, I eagerly returned home, ready to have that conversation. However, to my disappointment, Sarah never showed up, and I grew tired, falling asleep on the couch. The next morning, when I woke up, she was still asleep in the bedroom. I left her a text and headed to the office. The following days unfolded similarly. Sarah returned home much later than expected, and I refrained from questioning her because our busy schedules often kept us apart. However, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. After a week of not seeing each other, I felt compelled to investigate what was happening. Before resorting to detective work, I attempted to discuss her schedule multiple times, but she offered only vague answers. After work one day, I went directly to Sarah's workplace, only to find it empty. I called her from outside her office to ask where she was. When she answered, I heard music in the background. She said, "Hi baby, I'll be late today. I'm sorry, work's been crazy, and we'll be stuck at the office all night." My heart sank, and I couldn't utter a word. I ended the call, tears clouding my vision. Even though my sight was blurry, I grasped the situation. Sarah was having an affair. It seemed like the only logical explanation for everything that was happening. Unable to think clearly, I sought solace in a nearby bar. After 4 drinks, I lost count and ended up passed out on the bar floor. The waiter woke me up at 3 a.m. when they were closing, and I stumbled my way home. Of course, Sarah wasn't there. My head was spinning, and I somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up well past office hours and heard noise coming from the kitchen. I found Sarah casually cooking, which left me confused. Could I be overthinking this? There was a chance they were working somewhere else, not at the office. She made a remark about my drinking and dozing off, and I just smiled, saying nothing. I inquired about her whereabouts the previous night because I wanted to discuss something important and take her out to dinner. My suspicions were confirmed when she mentioned once again that she had been at her office all night, working. I felt the need to uncover the reason behind her lie, but I was afraid to discover the truth. I made a call to my workplace informing them that I wouldn't be coming in. My plan was to find some clues to understand what was happening and why. She left for work around noon, and I stayed behind, claiming not to feel well. She gave me a goodbye kiss on the forehead and promised to return by 7. After she left, I waited for about 5 minutes before following her. She got into her car and drove in the direction of her office, which seemed to confirm her story. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or suspicious. I waited in my car at her office for the next half hour, hoping for some revelation, but nothing occurred. Around 5 p.m., when I was about to give up and leave, I saw my boss's car pull into the driveway. I quickly ducked into my car, not wanting him to see me as I had essentially been spying on my wife and missing work for no apparent reason. However, instead of passing by me, he parked his car next to mine, and I witnessed Sarah exiting the building. My body froze, and my brain ceased to function as I watched the two of them briefly kiss before disappearing into his car. My wife is having an affair with my boss. What should I do? Update number 1. Hey everyone, it's been a week since I discovered the affair between my wife and my boss, and everything that used to be routine in my life has turned into a complex ordeal. I wanted to share that the responses to my situation have been quite varied, but the majority of you have suggested that I confront her. As much as I would like to, there's a significant issue with this approach. You see, I've worked diligently to establish my financial stability, and I don't want to jeopardize that over my wife's infidelity. I can't comprehend why she feels the need for another man. It's only been 2 years since we got married, and she's already bored with us. I've been losing sleep trying to find a rational explanation for her actions, but so far, I haven't found one aside from the possibility that she's simply a terrible person who doesn't grasp the gravity of her choices. Additionally, she's completely unaware that I've discovered her affair, and I'm at a loss for how to proceed. However, some of you have suggested seeking help from Emily, and I've been leaning toward that idea as well. It seems like a good way to balance saving my career while still exposing Mike and Sarah. I treated Sarah the same way all week so that she wouldn't suspect anything. Meanwhile, she's been discussing our future with children and our house as if everything's normal. It really hurt when she brought up the topic of having children with me. I love her, and I'd love to start a family with her. However, it took me less than 24 hours to come to terms with the fact that those dreams are now shattered. My wife is manipulative and not a very good person. She sleeps beside me, dreaming of her future while she's involved with my boss in some way. My priority was securing my position at the company before taking any action regarding the affair, so I arranged to meet with Emily. Unfortunately, the meeting didn't go as expected. Emily and I were acquainted because of a formal dinner we had attended, but I can't say we were close friends. She welcomed me into her home, but what transpired next shattered my hopes. As I confided in Emily about her husband and my wife, she went into complete denial. She blamed me for having impure thoughts and found my accusations highly offensive. I was unprepared for her reaction and couldn't make her understand the seriousness of the situation. She rudely told me to leave her alone, and I complied. However, before I departed, I asked her not to inform Mike and suggested she investigate the matter herself before alerting anyone else. She simply nodded and gestured towards the door, signaling my departure. It was my cue to leave. 2 weeks passed, and I hadn't heard anything from Emily. I was growing increasingly restless. During this time, Mike and Sarah's secret meetings continued at least twice a week. Sarah claimed she had to work late into the night and couldn't come home. Knowing all of this was happening, I couldn't help but feel a surge of revenge and anger welling up within me. My frustration eventually transformed into pure rage. Now I was determined to expose both of them for their heinous actions and their pretense of loving their spouses. Finally, after 2 weeks, I received a call from Emily. She asked to meet me, but this time, not at her home. We met at a nearby cafe and she appeared unwell. I inquired about her well-being and her eyes were dark and filled with circles, hinting at her distress. She began to sob, and I didn't know how to comfort her, so I simply allowed her to cry while holding her hand. After she collected herself, she retrieved her laptop. I was perplexed because I had no interest in seeing explicit images of her husband or my wife. Emily showed me several photos of young women, mostly in their late 20s, many of whom were married. I could discern their marital status from the rings on their fingers. "So what am I exactly looking at here?" I asked. "These are the findings from the private investigator I hired to look into my husband's secrets," Emily explained. My gaze dropped to the floor, and my brain felt like it was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Emily had hired a private detective to validate the truth behind my story. She believed that if she confronted her husband without solid evidence, the truth might remain hidden forever. In her quest to uncover information about him and my wife, she discovered that Mike had been involved with 5 other women. My heart ached for her, and I felt remorse for my role in this situation. Emily appeared to be a kind-hearted person, deeply in love with Mike, making it difficult to fathom his unfaithful behavior. With the remaining empathy in me, I turned to Emily and asked how I could assist her. What Emily revealed next was as surprising as the fact that Mike had been dating 6 different women. Emily's full name was Emily McNeil, and her father was the owner of the company where I worked. After Emily married Mike, her father appointed him as the CEO of the company. This revelation shattered my perception of Mike as a self-made young billionaire. Emily assured me that my job was secure and even promised a promotion if I helped her expose Mike's infidelity and facilitate their divorce. I readily agreed because I too desired a divorce. However, there was much at stake for both of us. Neither of us had any intention of giving a dime to our spouses in the divorce. So we agreed to meet again the following Monday at the same location. In the meantime, we needed to come up with a revenge plan that was both reasonable and justified. When it came to providing evidence, we had a substantial amount. The private investigator had amassed proof of Sarah's and Mike's affair. Upon returning home, I was surprised to find Sarah waiting there. She had prepared a nice dinner and urged me to freshen up quickly so we could enjoy it while it was still warm. However, my recent meeting with Emily had left me deeply troubled, and I couldn't keep my thoughts to myself. I openly confessed that I intended to divorce Sarah. As I stood under the running shower, my tears mixed with the water. I couldn't comprehend why all of this was happening. Despite everything, I still loved Sarah and had dreams of a future together with her. Her casual demeanor was causing my heart and ego to ache. I had an overwhelming urge to confront her with the concrete evidence Emily had given me and demand an explanation. However, I knew that if I took that step, both Mike and Sarah would become prepared for what lay ahead. Our plan to humiliate them and ensure they didn't get a single penny in the divorce would be compromised. Additionally, I couldn't bear to involve Emily any further in this complicated situation. So I went to the dining room after my shower and did the complete opposite. I talked, I laughed, and I had dinner with my unfaithful wife. She had no idea. Silly girl. Here's an update. Hello, for the past month, Emily and I have been meeting every Monday to discuss our plan going forward. I've received a lot of supportive responses for the step I'm about to take, and I'm grateful for this community. Sometimes it's tough not to lose sight of yourself and feel like the worst person on the planet for doing this to your spouse. But the positive words you've all shared show that you understand where I'm coming from. I don't want to waste my life's work on someone who's clearly having an affair with my boss. Yesterday was Monday, and it marked our final meeting before putting our plan into action. Emily and I spent a month gathering evidence and tracking their movements, how much time they spent together and what they did. Some of the information was hard to stomach, but Mike's file was much thicker than Sarah's, and I could see the shame in Emily's eyes regarding her husband's infidelity. Why do women think that if their husband is a jerk, it's somehow their fault? It's not. It's not. If anything, they should be relieved to leave them, and it's the best thing you can do for your own healing. We made the decision that we wanted to expose them in front of everyone, and the perfect opportunity was at our office event, which was just a week away. Quite ironic, considering I was a candidate for Employee of the Year, and Emily was going to be there presenting awards to the employees. That moment was going to be our chance to reveal the truth to everyone. Emily wanted her family to be present, and I simply wanted Sarah to feel the humiliation she had brought upon herself by toying with my love and emotions. Finally, the day arrived, and we all gathered at the finest 5-star venue in New York City. My heart raced, and I breathed nervously. Sarah, Emily, Mike, and I were all under the same roof, and our lives were on the verge of a major change. Emily was on stage, presenting awards, and the announcement for the Best Employee of the Year award would come towards the end. I knew I would receive the award, but my speech would alter the dynamics of the company. To be honest, I was scared. When they called my name for the award, I went up on stage, and Emily handed me the microphone along with the award. I whispered, "It's showtime." And just then, the projector behind me went dark, and the spotlight shifted to Sarah. Every person in the room turned their attention toward her as I uttered these words. This award goes to my loving wife for always supporting me and allowing me to excel in my career. I express gratitude for her being my boss's clear favorite, and for revealing her true nature early in our marriage. Right after I spoke those words, the projector began displaying rather personal pictures of Sarah and Mike. The audience reacted with shock, gasping for air, and hushed whispers filled the room. Half the people gazed at Mike, while the other half fixed their eyes on Sarah. Emily swiftly grabbed the microphone from my hand and declared, "I will expose you, Mike." Emily's father, Joshua McNeil, the company's founder and president, was also present, or at least he used to be. Emily looked at him tearfully as he canceled the event and instructed the guests to depart, leaving only the five of us in silence. Mr. McNeil, clearly furious with Mike, started hurling curses at him, vowing to ruin his life and career in no time. Mike appeared as though he had seen a ghost, and Sarah couldn't even muster the courage to meet my gaze. She stared at her shoes for the next 15 minutes until I left. I went directly home, and as I stepped into my house, a flood of emotions overwhelmed me. My life was a mess, with Sarah's unfaithfulness, my shattered dreams, and the risky move I made that could destroy my career. I cried my heart out and felt more alone than I ever had before. I was on the brink of divorcing my almost new wife. We had only celebrated one anniversary, and I was about to tarnish her reputation and crush all my dreams in court. Over the next few months, no matter how much self-pity I felt, I couldn't muster any excuse or sympathy for Sarah. I knew I was doing the right thing by filing for divorce, so I opened a bottle of scotch to help me fall asleep. It was already 2 a.m., and my mind wouldn't let me rest. I'm almost tipsy as I type this now, so I hope I've covered all the awful details of the most horrific day I've ever experienced. As for Emily and me, we've already initiated divorce proceedings, but our lawyers were waiting to submit the paperwork until after the annual function. We wanted both our spouses to witness the full extent of their actions and not keep it a quiet divorce. Now it's done. The paperwork will be processed soon, and we'll have to face each other in court. I'll try to keep you updated in the days to come. You guys are the only ones I've been able to share my story with, to be honest. Here's update number 3. It's been quite some time, like maybe 6 or 7 months, since I last posted anything about this dramatic chapter of my life. To be honest, I've lost track of time. When you're either extremely happy or in immense pain, time just slips by. That's what happened to me. This will be my final update because the story of Sarah and me has come to an end. I'll share all the details, but it's difficult for me to even type this out. I want to say thank you in advance to all of you who had kind words for me and made me believe that I'm not a terrible person. Just someone who's hurting. After the annual function night, I drowned my sorrows in alcohol, and when I woke up the next morning, Sarah was nowhere to be found. I didn't bother looking for her or trying to reach out. When I was in a more composed state, I called Emily to check on the status of the divorce papers, and she told me that both Mike and Sarah would receive the papers within the next 2 days. I was prepared, ready for Sarah to look me in the eyes and see the pain she had caused for no reason. The day of our first court hearing arrived. Our lawyers, handpicked by Mr. McNeil himself, were on our side, so I had full confidence in our representation. Besides, we had all the concrete evidence required to prove our case against our cheating spouses. It was finally time for me to inform my parents about the situation before they learned about it through the news because, well, that's what happens when you're involved with a billionaire. When I called them, my mother started crying and sympathizing with me. They never imagined Sarah doing something like this, but they supported my decision to go public and get a divorce. In no time, they flew to New York to stand by my side. Upon reaching the courthouse, I noticed that Sarah was living with her parents, and both of them were there with her. No matter how shameless it may seem, parents are naturally inclined to support their child, right? Fair enough. The legal proceedings began, and our lawyers went after everything related to Mike and Sarah, their careers, reputations, behavior, courage, you name it. They were thoroughly shamed. I felt sorry for Sarah's parents having to witness it all, but it was her choice to have them in the room, so it was all on her. Everything was on her. By the end of the presentations from her lawyers, there was absolutely no room for a defense. The room was filled with a sense of guilt, and I was 100% confident that our divorce would be granted. But Mr. McNeil had different intentions. At his request, the lawyers demanded that Mike be removed from any position within the company and be given a negative character certificate, making it extremely challenging for him to restart his career in this field. Both of them were stripped of any legal rights over our finances. Instead, they were required to pay a certain amount as compensation for the mental harassment they had caused, and were not allowed to claim anything from our joint accounts or finances, including those of our spouses. Mike even had tears in his eyes, and Sarah was overwhelmed with guilt. We were all too young to have gone through this, but in the end, we emerged victorious. As we drove back home, I received a text from Sarah, a heartfelt apology where she expressed her deep remorse for putting me in this situation and mentioned her plans to move out of town soon. My parents tried to console me, and we were all too distraught to discuss the matter any further. The case and its details were widely covered by news channels, with our pictures displayed on screen. The entire New York City must have learned about what transpired among the four of us. It was a revenge I had desired, even though it wasn't the life I'd envisioned with my wife. I genuinely believe that what happened was what she deserved. I assumed Mike's position as a manager, just as Sarah had promised. And no, it wasn't easy returning to that office. My personal life became a subject of ridicule, but I was unwavering in my commitment to my career. I still believed in love and loyalty, hoping that someday I'd find the woman I deserved. I had no idea what became of Mike, but I heard he left town too. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. Story 2. Full disclosure, this isn't my personal story. It actually happened to a friend of mine who has been living in the USA for a long time. Although I'll adjust some of the dialogue for clarity, my friend gave me permission to share his tale online. And to make it easier to narrate, I'll present it as if it happened to me. I've also altered a few details to protect privacy. I share my living space with my girlfriend Karen and an old grade school buddy named Jake, who is employed as a sales rep. Our residence is situated on the outskirts of a well-known city in the United States. In my late 22nd, I found myself in need of employment after the bar where I'd been working closed down. Recognizing my desperate situation, Jake reached out to me and informed me that his new girlfriend Jill had recently acquired a motel with a small kitchen and was in search of hired help. Naturally, I eagerly embraced this opportunity, especially since Karen wasn't currently employed. Our bills were accumulating, and our health insurance premiums were looming. I gave Jill a call and arranged to meet her at her new property for a formal introduction. Jake had already personally introduced me to Jill and had informed her that I had practical experience in the hospitality industry. To provide some context, my father is an electrician and firmly believes that if you can afford to pay someone to fix something, you can probably do it more affordably yourself. He imparted a wealth of knowledge to me, and he continues to do. So even today. Following a 30-minute conversation, Jill tested my skills with various tasks such as rewiring an outlet, unclogging a sink, and quizzing me about liquor laws. It goes without saying that I was hired on the spot. Initially, the work primarily focused on preparing the property for the business's opening. Jill had expected minor tasks like painting, replacing fixtures and furniture, but we soon discovered that the electrical wiring was in terrible shape, requiring a complete rewiring. This posed a budgetary challenge for Jill, as it would have exceeded her financial plan. Fortunately for Jill, my father was between contracts and offered his services, utilizing leftover materials from previous jobs which had already been paid for. Any new materials required would be covered by Jill. Regarding payment for his labor, my dad simply requested a steak and beer on Friday nights. After 3 weeks of assisting my dad, the wiring was not only completed but also met all the required codes, and it cost significantly less. Jill and I spent the next 1 to 2 months painting all 15 motel rooms, the bistro, and the bar, as well as cleaning the kitchen and cool rooms. Jake would occasionally offer to help but would always leave after 20 minutes, claiming he had to make a sale. Jill often worked late into the night because this venture was her dream. During my spare time, I would take furniture home to restore, returning it once it was in good condition. The business finally opened after 6 months, thanks in part to my dad's assistance, and it launched under budget. Jill managed the business and oversaw the kitchen, while I worked wherever I was needed, whether in the kitchen, at the bar, or tending to maintenance. I was on a salary, held the position of second in command, and could work in any role as required. Things were going smoothly for a year. Our business was profitable, my dad enjoyed his weekly beer and steak, Karen appeared content, and Jake continued working as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company. One day, I fell ill at work and decided to clock off early and head home. Upon pulling into my driveway, aside from a sinking feeling in my stomach, everything seemed normal. Jake's car was parked there, but that was to be expected since he lived with us, so I didn't think anything was amiss. As usual, I parked my car behind Jake's. This detail becomes important later. When I opened the door, I was greeted with the shocking sight of Karen and Jake engaging in an intimate act on the couch. Jake hastily grabbed his pants and made a quick escape through the back door upon seeing me. Karen and I had a heated argument that lasted late into the night. She tried to shift the blame onto me, suggesting that I was never home and spent too much time with Jill, even though our relationship was strictly professional. I eventually went to bed and suggested that she could sleep in Jake's bed, as it seemed more comfortable for her. I also called Jill to inform her of the situation, as Jake was her boyfriend. Jill was understandably upset about Jake's infidelity but admitted that she had suspected he might be seeing someone else. She kindly offered me a room at the motel until I figured out my next steps. The following day, I loaded my personal belongings into my truck. Jake's car was still parked there because I had blocked it earlier. I told Karen that she could keep the rental and the furniture. I informed her that I would return for my tools in a few hours, and requested that she not be present. That afternoon, when I returned home to load my tools into my truck, I stumbled upon an unfamiliar bag beneath my workbench. Upon closer inspection, I discovered a significant quantity of small tablets. The way they were packaged and hidden led me to suspect they were likely party pills. A thorough search of the house revealed 2 more bags and approximately $12,000 in cash. It all added up, and I realized that Jake's supposed pharmaceutical sales job was actually a front for his pill-selling activities. It occurred to me that Jake might have given these pills to Karen for their intimate moments. I was furious at first, but then I realized I had everything I needed for payback. Jake's car was still parked in the same spot. I entered the house, took his spare keys, and put on some gloves I found in the garage. I stashed half of the money and 1 bag of pills in his car trunk. I removed his spare tire from the wheel well and concealed the bag there. The other 2 bags I discreetly disposed of down the storm drain in the alley behind my house. As for the $6,000 cash, well, Jake did cost me a house full of furniture, just saying. I sent a message to both Jake and Karen following the typical script for someone who's hurt. I can't believe you did this. We were friends, blah blah blah. I've left. I hope you two are happy together. I then made an anonymous tip to the local police and ATF, describing a man matching Jake's description loading what appeared to be narcotics into a car that matched Jake's vehicle. I also provided a partial license plate number that matched his car. It didn't take long for law enforcement to locate the car and discover the pills. What I didn't anticipate was that Karen was driving the car at the time. She was later released when they realized she was driving the wrong car at the wrong time. However, a warrant was issued for Jake's arrest. As a bonus, I later found out that not only were the police after Jake, but his supplier was as well, since he had lost a substantial amount of product. Fast forward 3 months, I bought a house, still worked with Jill. Karen was expecting Jake's child, and he was on the run. I suspected she was staying in touch with Jake because she suddenly left the area when she was 8 months pregnant. 12 months after the incident, during a night of drinking, Jill and I mixed business with pleasure and started dating. That was a decade ago. We're now married, have 2 kids, and just opened our 3rd business. Dad still enjoys his weekly steak and beer. I heard a rumor that Jake and Karen ended up in Alaska, but I can't confirm it. I do feel a bit remorseful about it now because Jake inadvertently made it possible for me to be with Jill and live a wonderful life. I genuinely hope they're doing well.
Story 3.
The morning reveille hadn't sounded for hours, but John Carter's internal clock had him awake at 0500 sharp. 20 years of military service had ingrained routines deeper than mere habit. They were the framework that held his world together. He stood at attention before his bedroom mirror, each movement precise as he adjusted his uniform. The familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders with his medals and campaign ribbons. His fingers traced the Distinguished Service Cross, a reminder of the lives he'd saved in Kandahar when everything had gone sideways. The mission had taught him that evil rarely announced itself with gunfire and explosions. Sometimes it crept in slowly, wearing a familiar face, hiding behind routine until it was too late. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heating system and Victoria's steady breathing from their bed. John studied his wife's reflection in the mirror, the elegant curve of her shoulder, the carefully maintained honey blonde hair splayed across her pillow. Even in sleep, she looked posed, as if aware of an audience. When had that artificial perfection replaced the genuine warmth he'd fallen in love with? The floor creaked outside their bedroom. Emily's footsteps, hesitant and light. John could recognize each family member's tread, a skill that had kept his unit alive in urban combat, now serving to track the subtle rhythms of his home life. His daughter's footsteps had changed lately, becoming more tentative, like someone trying to move through a minefield that a soft knock drew his attention. "Come in, Emily," he called, pitching his voice low to avoid waking Victoria. The door hinges whispered as Emily slipped inside, her reflection appearing beside his in the mirror. At 16, she had Victoria's delicate features, but where her mother's beauty was a weapon, Emily's was still innocent, though lately, that innocence seemed to be fraying at the edges. Dad. Her voice barely carried across the room. Do you have to go to the base today? John turned, taking in the oversized sweater that seemed to swallow her slight frame, the way her fingers worried at the frayed cuffs. Emily had always been reserved, finding comfort in books and quiet corners, but this was different. This was fear wearing his daughter's face. Just the morning briefing, sweetheart. I'll be home for dinner. He reached out slowly. He'd learned to telegraph his movements lately, as Emily had grown startlingly jumpy. His hand found her shoulder, feeling the slight tremor that ran through her at the contact before she leaned into his touch. Could you maybe pick me up from school today? The tremor in her voice matched the one in her shoulders. Of course. Is everything okay at school? 20 years of military intelligence had taught John to read between the lines, to spot the questions people couldn't bring themselves to ask. Emily's eyes darted to the floor, then to the bed where Victoria still lay sleeping. Yeah, everything's fine. I just want to come home right after. The bed rustled as Victoria stirred, her voice carrying that precise note of maternal concern that never quite reached her eyes. Emily, why are you up so early, dear? John watched his daughter's transformation, the way her shoulders pulled back, her chin lifting in an unconscious mimicry of her mother's perfect posture. The change happened in seconds, like watching a soldier don combat armor. I have a test first period, Emily said, her voice carefully modulated. I wanted to review my notes. Victoria sat up, the morning light catching the silk of her negligee. Always studying. You should be more concerned with making friends, dear. Academic excellence only gets you so far in life. Her smile held a sharp edge. Just look at your father, all that discipline, all those medals, and what does he have to show for it? I have a daughter I'm proud of, John said quietly, watching Emily's posture soften slightly at his words. And that's worth more than any medal. Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking crystal. Of course you'd say that. Emily, go get ready for school. We need to work on your makeup today. You're not a child anymore, and it's time you started presenting yourself properly. Emily's retreat was almost soundless, but John caught the slight hitch in her breathing. He waited until the door closed before turning to Victoria. She's 16. Let her be a kid while she can. A kid? Victoria stretched languorously, each movement calculated. Wake up, John. The world doesn't reward innocence. The sooner she learns that, the better off she'll be. She rose from the bed, moving past him with practiced grace. Not everyone can hide behind a uniform and pretend the world is as simple as following orders. The words were familiar weapons, aimed with precision born of years of marriage. Once they might have drawn blood. Now John recognized them for what they were, covering fire, meant to distract from whatever Victoria was really hiding. That he finished dressing in silence, his mind already cycling through tactical assessments. Something was wrong in his home, something that had his daughter walking like she was crossing a battlefield. And if there was one thing John Carter knew, it was how to analyze a battlefield. Breakfast was a choreographed affair, with Victoria directing conversation like a general deploying troops. Emily, dear, you really should join the committee for the spring formal. Mrs. Anderson specifically asked about you. Emily pushed her eggs around her plate. I have a lot of studying to do. Studies. Victoria sipped her coffee, perfectly manicured nails tapping against the ceramic. You know, there's a new assistant coach for the tennis team. Marcus, you remember Marcus from the charity gala? He mentioned he'd be happy to give you private lessons. The fork in Emily's hand clattered against her plate. John didn't miss the way her face went pale, or how Victoria's smile sharpened at the reaction. I don't really like tennis, Emily managed. Nonsense. Marcus is an excellent teacher. Very. Hands-on with his students. Victoria's eyes met John's over her coffee cup, something challenging in her gaze. Not everyone believes in maintaining distance like your father does. John set his own cup down carefully, years of discipline keeping his hand steady. I'll pick you up at 3, Emily. We can stop for ice cream if you'd like. The relief in Emily's eyes was like watching a drowning person spot a lifeline. Yes, please. Ice cream? Victoria's laugh held a note of contempt. Really, John? She's not 5 anymore. Besides, she needs to watch her figure if she's going to attract the right kind of attention. The right kind of attention? John kept his voice level, but something in his tone made Victoria's smile falter slightly. And what kind would that be? The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations, until Victoria stood with artificial brightness. Come along, Emily. We don't want to be late. I'm heading to the club after I drop you off tennis lesson with Marcus. Don't wait up, John. As they left, John remained at the table, his tactical mind processing 100 small details. Emily's fear, Victoria's pointed comments, the way his daughter seemed to be disappearing into herself. He'd learned in combat that the most dangerous threats weren't always the ones that announced themselves with gunfire. Sometimes they worked in silence, destroying their targets from within. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his recent photos until he found one from last year's father-daughter dance. Emily was smiling in the picture, her face bright with genuine joy as they stood together in their formal wear. He compared that image to the ghost who had sat at his breakfast table, and something cold settled in his stomach. His daughter was under attack. And John Carter had never been one to leave a soldier behind in hostile territory. The morning briefing at Fort Bradley dragged like a patrol through hostile territory. John's mind kept drifting to Emily's face at breakfast, cataloging the changes he'd observed over the past months. The growing shadows under her eyes, the way she'd stopped wearing the butterfly hair clips she'd loved, how she'd withdrawn from the drama club that had once been her sanctuary. Colonel Carter? Major Richard's voice cut through his thoughts. Your assessment of the new security protocols? John shifted smoothly into his professional role, years of compartmentalization taking over. The protocols are solid, but we need to address the vulnerability in the communications relay. One weak link can compromise the entire system. The words felt heavy with double meaning. How many weak links had he missed in his own home? How many warnings had he failed to read? The briefing ended at 1,400 hours, giving him time to review personnel files before heading to Emily's school. He found himself studying the faces of his junior officers, remembering how many times he'd had to piece together the truth from what wasn't being said. Body language, subtle changes in behavior. The signs had always been there, if you knew how to read them. At precisely 1,455 hours, John pulled up outside Riverside High School. The familiar rhythm of teenagers flooding out of the building was disrupted by something that made his combat instincts flare. A sleek black Mercedes idling across the street, its driver watching the exodus with predatory focus. John's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he spotted Emily emerging from the building. She moved like someone crossing open ground under enemy observation, her shoulders hunched, books clutched to her chest like body armor. Her eyes darted to the black Mercedes, and John saw raw fear flash across her face before she hurried toward his car. The Mercedes driver turned his head, and John got his first clear look at Marcus. Expensive suit, carefully styled hair. The kind of smile that reminded John of arms dealers he'd encountered in war zones. All surface charm masking something rotten underneath. Emily practically dove into the passenger seat. Can we go? Please. Instead of answering, John watched Marcus's car glide past them, noting the license plate with military precision. Emily, who was that man? No one, she whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. John drove in silence for several minutes, his mind running through scenarios, analyzing threats. He pulled into the parking lot of Annie's ice cream parlor, their old refuge from hard days, the place they'd celebrated every dance recital and good report card. Talk to me, sweetheart, he said softly as he killed the engine. Whatever it is, we can handle it together. Emily stared at her hands, tears gathering in her eyes. The silence stretched, broken only by the cheerful jingle of the ice cream parlor's door as customers came and went. John waited, giving her the space to find her voice, just as he'd waited out frightened civilians in combat zones. His name is Marcus, she finally whispered, each word seeming to cost her something vital. He's Mom's friend. The way she said friend made John's stomach turn, but he kept his voice steady. What do you mean, Mom's friend? They're together. Emily's words came faster now, like a dam breaking. She brought him to the house when you were deployed last month. She said I needed to learn how men really are, that your values were... Her voice cracked. She made me watch them sometimes, Dad. She said I needed to learn how to control men, how to be more like her. John's training kicked in, keeping his breathing steady even as rage built in his chest. "Tell me everything, Emily. Don't leave anything out." The story poured out of her how Marcus had started showing up at her school, making comments that made her skin crawl. How Victoria had laughed when Emily told her she was scared of him. The way her mother had started critiquing her clothes, her manner, pushing her to be more appealing. "Mom said I was being ridiculous, that I should be flattered by the attention." Emily's voice had gone distant, disconnected. She said maybe if you weren't so boring, so stuck on your precious honor, she wouldn't need Marcus. Through the ice cream parlor's window, John could see families enjoying their treats, children laughing, parents smiling. The normalcy of it seemed obscene against Emily's revelations. Victoria hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She had actively participated in terrorizing their daughter, trying to corrupt the innocent soul John had sworn to protect. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked gently, though he already knew the answer. "Mom said you wouldn't understand, that you'd just make things worse." Emily's shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. She said no one would believe me anyway, because she's so respected in the community. The other moms all love her, and Marcus, he donates to the school, coaches tennis. Everyone thinks he's so charming. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been stronger." "No, Emily. None of this is your fault. None of it." John pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her tears soak through his uniform shirt. The military discipline that had shaped his life warred with the rage, building inside him rage at Victoria's betrayal, at Marcus's predatory behavior, at the thought of his daughter suffering in silence. That he held her. His mind was already shifting into combat mode, analyzing vectors of attack, identifying vulnerabilities. Victoria and Marcus had declared war on his daughter's innocence, using psychological warfare to break down her defenses. But they'd made a critical error. They'd assumed John's military discipline made him predictable, manageable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Emily," he said softly, "I need you to tell me one more thing. Has Marcus ever—" "No," she said quickly. "He just makes comments, stands too close. Mom says I'm imagining things, that I'm being a prude, but—" She shuddered. "The way he watches me, Dad, like he's waiting for something." John's jaw tightened. He'd seen that look before in war zones where predators targeted the vulnerable. He'd put down those threats with extreme prejudice. This situation would require more subtlety, but the end result would be the same. "We're going home," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had guided troops through combat zones. "Pack a bag. We're not staying there tonight." "But Mom, your mother made her choice." The words came out clipped, final. She chose to align herself with a predator, to use her own daughter as bait. The last word tasted like ashes in his mouth. That's not happening anymore. As they drove home, John's mind was already gaming out scenarios, analyzing angles of attack. Victoria had spent years building her social fortress, cultivating an image of the perfect mother, the community leader. Marcus had positioned himself as the charming benefactor, the helpful coach. They constructed their hunting blind carefully, using respectability as camouflage, but John Carter hadn't earned his medals by respecting camouflage. He'd earned them by seeing through it, by identifying threats and neutralizing them with surgical precision. Victoria thought his military background made him rigid, predictable. Marcus saw him as an obstacle to be managed. Neither of them understood what they were dealing with. But they were about to learn. Victoria was waiting in the living room when they arrived home, scrolling through her phone with practiced nonchalance. The house smelled of her expensive perfume, the same scent that had once filled John's dreams during deployments, now cloying and artificial in his nostrils. She looked up with an artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, isn't this cozy? Father-daughter bonding time?" John felt Emily tense beside him. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "Pack what you need for a few days." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? And where exactly do you think you're taking my daughter?" "Emily, go upstairs and pack," John repeated, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had commanded troops in combat zones. He waited until Emily's footsteps faded before turning back to his wife. "We need to talk about Marcus." Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut. Oh, and what about Marcus? He's been harassing our daughter, and you've been encouraging it. Harassing? Victoria set her phone down with deliberate care, her manicured nails clicking against the glass coffee table. Please, I'm teaching her valuable life lessons, something you clearly can't do with all your rigid morality and outdated values. Life lessons? John's voice was deadly quiet. You forced our 16-year-old daughter to watch you with your lover. You've been helping him terrorize her. Victoria stood, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she approached him. Her perfume filled the air between them, no longer the scent of home, but something poisonous, corrupting. You really don't get it, do you? Your precious military discipline, your obsession with honor, it's pathetic. Emily needs to learn how the real world works. Marcus is helping me show her that. By stalking her at school? By making her afraid to walk down the hallways? Oh, don't be so dramatic. Victoria's smile turned cruel, an expression John had seen before on the faces of enemies who thought they held all the cards. Marcus appreciates youth and beauty, unlike some people. He understands that a girl Emily's age needs guidance, needs to learn how to use what she has. The rage in John's chest crystallized into something cold and purposeful. You're talking about our daughter. I'm talking about reality, John. Face it. You're too boring to keep my attention, too wrapped up in your precious duty to understand what a woman really needs. At least Marcus knows how to make things exciting. Victoria's eyes glittered with malice, and he's very interested in Emily's development. John felt something shift inside him, like the final tumbler falling into place in a lock. The woman before him wasn't his wife of 17 years, wasn't the mother of his child. She was an enemy combatant who had infiltrated his home, who had been systematically attacking his daughter's soul. This ends now, he said, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded troops under fire. You will tell Marcus to stay away from Emily? Or what? Victoria cut him off with a mocking laugh. You'll report him? Report me? Who do you think they'll believe? The dedicated military man who's barely home, or the loving mother who's active in every school committee? She stepped closer, her smile sharpening. Face it, John, you can't protect her from the real world forever. Sooner or later, she'll learn that my way is the only way that matters. In that moment, John saw Victoria clearly for the first time, not as his wife, not as Emily's mother, but as a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. His military training kicked in, analyzing the threat and calculating the best strategy for neutralizing it. You're right about one thing, he said quietly. I can't protect her from the real world, but I can protect her from you. Is that a threat, Colonel? Victoria's voice dripped with mockery. No, it's a promise. John turned and headed for the stairs, Victoria's laughter following him like poison. Go ahead, play the hero. But remember, Emily's growing up, and sooner or later, she'll learn that the world works my way, not yours. John paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at the woman he had once loved. No, Victoria, she won't. Because unlike you, our daughter has something you'll never understand, a soul. Upstairs, he found Emily sitting on her bed, her small suitcase already packed. She looked up at him with eyes too old for her face, searching for reassurance. Dad, we're going to stay at the base guest quarters tonight, he said gently. Pack anything else you need. But Mom, your mother won't be a problem anymore. John sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. I promise you, Emily, no one is going to hurt you again. Not Marcus, not your mother, no one. As Emily gathered her remaining belongings, John could hear Victoria on the phone downstairs, her voice raised in anger. He knew she was probably calling Marcus, planning their next move. Let them plot. Let them scheme. They had no idea what a father trained in military strategy was capable of when protecting his child. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made Emily freeze. Through the window, John saw the sleek black Mercedes Marcus, summoned by Victoria like a loyal attack dog. Emily's face went pale. Dad, he's here. Get your bag, John said calmly, his combat instincts fully engaged now. We're leaving through the back door. As they descended the back stairs, John could hear Victoria's voice from the front of the house. greeting Marcus with honeyed tones that now seemed as false as everything else about her. Emily's hand found his, squeezing tight. As they slipped out through the kitchen door, John helped Emily into his car, parked in the back alley where he'd started leaving it after first noticing the changes in his daughter. As they pulled away, he caught a glimpse of Marcus in his rearview mirror. The man's predatory face twisted with frustration as he realized his prey was escaping. Let them fume. Let them rage. John Carter had never lost a battle when the stakes really mattered. And he wasn't about to start now, not when his daughter's soul hung in the balance. Victoria and Marcus had made a fatal mistake. They had threatened someone under his protection. Now they would learn why John Carter's enemies had learned to fear his precision, his patience, and his absolute dedication to destroying those who crossed the lines he held sacred. As they drove through the gathering darkness toward the military base, John glanced at Emily's sleeping form in the passenger seat. The rage inside him had transformed into something cold and purposeful. Victoria thought his military discipline made him boring. She was about to learn that it made him lethal when he had a righteous cause. And there was no cause more righteous than saving his daughter from the predators who had dared to target her. The base guest quarters felt sterile after the poisoned comfort of home, but John preferred honest emptiness to false warmth. He watched Emily sleep on the narrow bed, her face finally peaceful after crying herself into exhaustion. The digital clock on the nightstand read 0200 hours. Time to begin the operation. John opened his laptop, the screen's blue glow casting shadows across the room. 20 years of military service had taught him that information was the key to victory. Victoria and Marcus had been running their operation like guerrilla fighters, using social camouflage to mask their movements. Time to strip that camouflage away. Then a knock at his door made him reach instinctively for his sidearm before remembering where he was. Enter. Major Tom Riley stepped in, closing the door quietly behind him. The base's head of intelligence operations looked as alert as ever, despite the hour. Got your message, Colonel. Situation that's serious? Worse. John gestured to the chair across from him. I need everything you can find on a Marcus drives a black Mercedes, coaches tennis at Riverside High, moves in the country club circuit. Riley's eyebrows rose. Official channels? Unofficial. This is personal. The kind of personal that needs to stay quiet, or the kind that's going to make noise. John's jaw tightened. The kind that involves my daughter? Riley's expression hardened. He had 2 teenagers of his own. Give me 4 hours. I'll wake up some contacts who owe me favors. Tom. John's voice stopped him at the door. This stays between us. Of course it does. That's what brothers in arms are for. Riley paused. John, how bad? Bad enough that I'm calling in favors at 0200. Riley nodded grimly. I'll start with his financials. Money always leaves traces. As the door closed, John's phone buzzed Victoria. He let it go to voicemail, then played the message on low volume. Really, John? Running away to your precious base? Marcus is furious. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Call me back immediately, or I'll file a police report for kidnapping. You can explain to your commanding officer why you're using military property for your domestic drama. A second message followed. Emily, sweetie, your father is being ridiculous. Come home now, and we can forget this whole thing. Marcus was asking about you. He's worried. He says you left your tennis racket in his car last week. Why didn't you tell me you were taking private lessons? We can talk about it when you get home. John's hand tightened on the phone. The casual mention of Emily being in Marcus's car made his combat instincts flare. Victoria was laying a paper trail, establishing a narrative of innocent contact. She'd learned psychological warfare well during their marriage that a soft sound made him turn. Emily stood in the bedroom doorway, arms wrapped around herself. I was never in his car, Dad. I swear. I know, sweetheart. Come here. He held out his arm, and she curled against his side like she had when she was small. Your mother is trying to establish a false narrative. Standard tactical procedure when preparing for engagement. What do you mean? She's creating a story that makes Marcus look innocent and me look unstable. If anyone investigates, she'll have texts, voicemails, witnesses at the club who'll say they saw you two together. She's building her defensive position. Emily's voice was small. She's really good at making people believe her version of things. That's because she's had practice. But she's never gone up against someone trained to spot manipulation. John squeezed her shoulder. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start gathering intelligence. What kind of intelligence? Everything. Marcus's background, his finances, his pattern of movement. In combat, you study your enemy until you know them better than they know themselves. Then you find their weak points. And Mom? John's voice was gentle but firm. Your mother made her choice, Emily. She chose to align herself with a predator, to use her own daughter as bait. That makes her an enemy combatant. Will you? Emily hesitated. Will you ever forgive her? No. The word was flat, final. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Some betrayals don't get forgiveness. His phone buzzed again, a text from Riley. Got something. Marcus Vaughn. Multiple names, multiple states. Pattern emerging. Meet me in the secure briefing room at 0700. Dad. Emily's voice was stronger now. I want to help. I want to fight back. John studied his daughter's face, seeing past the fear to the steel underneath. It'll be dangerous. Victoria and Marcus will try to discredit you, to make you doubt yourself. They've been doing that for months. Emily's jaw set in a way that reminded John of himself. I'm tired of being afraid. All right. John nodded slowly. First rule of combat. Know your enemy. Tomorrow, you tell me everything. Every interaction, every comment, every time they tried to manipulate you. We're building a pattern of behavior. Like gathering intel? Exactly. You're our primary intelligence source. Your mother and Marcus think they've broken you down, made you weak. That's their first mistake. Emily's smile was small but real, the first he'd seen in weeks. What's their second mistake? Thinking my military background makes me predictable. They're about to learn that discipline isn't the same as weakness. John checked his watch. 3 hours until briefing. Get some rest, soldier. Tomorrow, we start the counteroffensive. As Emily returned to bed, John turned back to his laptop. Victoria's voicemails played in his mind, each word revealing more than she intended. She thought she was the master manipulator, that her social maneuvering made her untouchable. She'd forgotten that before he was her husband, John Carter was a tactical specialist who'd spent 2 decades learning to dismantle enemy operations. His phone buzzed with another message from Riley. Found connection to 3 private schools in different states. All resigned under unclear circumstances. Pattern of complaints hushed up. Keep digging. John's reply was immediate, everything. Leave no stone unturned. The night deepened around the base, but John Carter didn't sleep. He'd entered combat mode, his mind processing information with military precision. Victoria and Marcus had declared war on his daughter's soul, using psychological warfare to break down her defenses. Now they would learn what happened when they brought their predatory games to a real warrior's battlefield. Dawn was still hours away, but the counteroffensive had already begun. The secure briefing room felt like a war chamber at 0700 hours. Maps and documents spread across the table as Major Riley laid out his findings. Emily sat beside John, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate, looking small but determined in one of his spare military sweatshirts. Marcus Vaughn, Riley began, tapping his tablet. Currently known as Marcus Vale in our community, but he's had at least 3 other names in the past decade. He moves through wealthy communities like a virus, always following the same pattern. Tell me, John said, watching Emily's knuckles whiten around her cup. Tennis coach, private instructor, generous donor to schools and youth programs. Gets close to wealthy families through their kids, especially targeting those with... Riley glanced at Emily apologetically. Those with vulnerable daughters and distracted parents. Show me the pattern, John demanded. Riley pulled up documents on the wall screen. Started in Connecticut under the name Marcus Vincent. Prestigious private school, lots of private lessons with teenage girls. Complaints started surfacing about inappropriate behavior, but money changed hands. Records were sealed. He disappeared before anything formal was filed. And then showed up in Pennsylvania 2 years later as Marcus Vale. Same pattern, tennis instructor, private lessons, donations to school programs. 3 families tried to press charges, but he had dirt on the parents. Messy divorces, affairs, financial irregularities. Everything got buried. Emily's voice was barely audible. He takes pictures. At the club. At school events. Mom says he's just being supportive, documenting memories. John's jaw tightened. Gathering ammunition. Smart predator, Riley agreed grimly. Creates social capital, builds relationships with influential parents, collects compromising information as insurance. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, he's too entrenched to touch. Until now, John's voice was steel. What's his current position? Tennis director at the country club, assistant coach at Riverside High, board member of 3 youth charities. Riley's disgust was evident. He's got photos with half the power players in town. Politicians, judges, business leaders all smiling with the generous philanthropist who's so dedicated to helping kids. Help me understand something, Tom. John leaned forward. How does a predator with this kind of pattern stay ahead of law enforcement? That's where it gets interesting. Riley pulled up financial records. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and a very interesting connection to a private investigation firm. He doesn't just gather dirt casually. He's professional about it. In Victoria, John kept his voice neutral for Emily's sake. What's her connection to his operation? Riley's expression darkened. Your wife's been making large deposits into an offshore account for the past 6 months. Account belongs to one of Marcus's shells. She's not just involved. She's financing him. Emily's cup clattered against the table. Mom's paying him? Why? Power, John answered quietly. Your mother craves it, doesn't she? The way people at the club defer to her, the influence she has in the community. Emily nodded slowly. She always talks about knowing everyone's secrets, about how that makes her untouchable. Marcus offers her something beyond an affair, Riley concluded. He's made her part of his operation. She identifies targets, helps him establish cover, probably helps gather compromising information. She's a spotter, John said grimly. In combat, a sniper works with a spotter who identifies targets and guides them in. Your mother's been playing that role for him. A knock at the door made them all tense. Lieutenant Parker stepped in, looking uncomfortable. Colonel Carter? There's someone at the main gate asking for you. Says his name is Marcus Vale. John felt Emily stiffen beside him. Stay here with Major Riley, he said softly. This is just a reconnaissance probe. He's testing our defenses. Dad, trust your commanding officer, soldier. He managed a small smile. That's an order. The drive to the main gate gave John time to settle into combat mode, analyzing angles of attack and defense. Marcus's Mercedes gleamed in the morning sun, its owner leaning against it with calculated casualness. Colonel Carter. Marcus straightened as John approached, offering his hand with a practiced smile. I hope you'll forgive the early visit, but I'm concerned about Emily. Victoria's worried sick. John ignored the offered hand. You're bold, coming onto a military base. Now, Colonel, there's no need for hostility. Marcus spread his hands, the picture of reasonable concern. I know Emily's been having some emotional difficulties lately. Teenagers often struggle with change, with understanding adult relationships. Victoria's told me how protective you are of your daughter. Has she? John's voice could have frozen hell. What else has my wife told you about my daughter? Look, I understand this is awkward. Marcus's smile never wavered. Finding out about Victoria and me, it must be difficult. But dragging Emily into our adult issues isn't healthy. Victoria says she's been acting out, making up stories. Interesting choice of words. John stepped closer, noting how Marcus's casual pose stiffened slightly. Acting out, making up stories. That's the narrative you usually establish, isn't it? Before you move on to your next hunting ground, the smile flickered. I'm not sure what you're implying, Colonel, but Marcus Vincent. Marcus Vale. How many names do you hide behind while you stalk teenage girls? John watched the blood drain from Marcus's face. How many families have you destroyed? How many lives have you poisoned? You're making a mistake. Marcus's voice hardened. I have friends in this community, influence. One phone call, and your command will hear all about how you're having a mental breakdown, using military resources for personal vendettas. Make your calls. John stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a combat whisper. But understand something. This isn't a game anymore. You're not dealing with distracted parents or vulnerable children. You're facing a warrior who's spent his life learning to destroy threats to those under his protection. Is that a threat, Colonel? No. It's a promise. Stay away from my daughter. Stay away from her school. If I see you within 100 yards of her, what happens next will make your previous hasty departures look like vacation planning. Marcus's smile turned ugly. Victoria warned me you were rigid, Colonel. Said you couldn't handle the real world, could only see things in black and white. But this isn't your precious military. Out here, everything's gray. That's where you're wrong. John turned to leave, then paused. There's nothing gray about predators targeting children. And there's nothing gray about what happens to those predators when they're finally caught. You've got nothing on me, Marcus called after him. No proof, no witnesses. Just the word of an unstable teenager and her overprotective father. John looked back, letting Marcus see the full weight of his combat experience in his eyes. You think I came to this meeting to make accusations? I came to give you a warning, one predator to another. The difference is I hunt armed enemies in combat zones. You hunt children in schools. He left Marcus standing by his expensive car, already pulling out his phone. Let him make his calls. Let him activate his network of compromised allies. John Carter had faced worse odds in actual war zones back in the briefing room. Emily looked up anxiously. What happened? Marcus just made his first tactical error, John said, watching Riley pull up more files on the screen. He came onto my territory, thinking he could intimidate me with social threats. Did it work? No, sweetheart. It told me exactly what kind of enemy we're dealing with, the kind that mistakes social power for real strength. John turned to Riley. Keep digging. Focus on the private investigation firm. If he's been gathering dirt on the community's power players, that's where we'll find his insurance files. And Mom? Emily's voice was stronger now. What about her part in this? Your mother made her choice. John's voice was final. She chose to be his spotter, to help him target vulnerable kids. Now she'll face the consequences of that choice. As Riley began outlining their next moves, John's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Marcus told me about your ridiculous threats. You're embarrassing yourself, John. Come home, apologize, and we can discuss this like adults. John deleted the message without responding. Victoria still thought she was dealing with her predictable military husband, the man whose rigid honor she'd mocked for years. She was about to learn that honor and weakness weren't the same thing in Marcus. He was about to learn why predators in nature fear the sound of war drums. The school board meeting room buzzed with tension as John took his seat in the back row. He'd chosen his position carefully. Clear sight lines to all exits, full view of the room, back against the wall. Combat habits died hard, and today they might prove useful. Victoria sat in the front row, perfectly coiffed in an expensive suit that practically screamed, "Concerned mother." She was surrounded by her usual coterie of social allies, their designer handbags and carefully arranged expressions matching hers. Marcus sat 2 rows behind her, his usual smirk firmly in place. You sure about this? Major Riley murmured from the seat beside John. Going public is risky. They're expecting me to stay quiet, to play by their rules. John watched Victoria lean over to whisper something to the board president, noting how the woman nodded sympathetically. Time to change the battlefield. The meeting began with routine business, but John could feel the tension building. Victoria kept glancing back at Marcus, their silent communication obvious to anyone trained to spot it. Finally, the board president cleared her throat. We have an unusual situation to address. Mrs. Carter has raised some concerns about inappropriate behavior involving her daughter Emily. Victoria stood, every movement calculated for maximum effect. Thank you, Margaret. This is difficult for me. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. As many of you know, my husband John has been under tremendous stress lately. His military background sometimes makes it hard for him to adapt to civilian life. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. John remained still, watching the performance with tactical precision. 2 days ago, he took our daughter from our home, using his military position to hide her on base. He's been making wild accusations about Marcus Vale, one of our most dedicated community members. Victoria's voice trembled perfectly. I'm worried about his mental state. He's always been rigid, seeing threats where none exist. If I may. Marcus stood, his expression a masterpiece of concerned dignity. I've tried to help Emily adjust to the changes in her family. As her tennis coach, I've seen how difficult this situation has been for her. But Colonel Carter seems to have convinced her that my efforts to mentor her were somehow inappropriate. John felt the room's sympathy shifting, exactly as Victoria and Marcus had planned. Time to spring the trap. I'd like to present some evidence. John's voice cut through the murmurs as he stood. Major Riley? Riley stepped forward, distributing folders to each board member. Financial records showing regular payments from Victoria Carter to offshore accounts controlled by Marcus Vale, also known as Marcus Vincent, Marcus Prescott, and 3 other aliases. Documentation of similar patterns at 3 private schools in different states, all ending in sealed complaints and hasty resignations. The board president's face went pale as she opened her folder. What is this? Evidence that Marcus Vale is a professional predator who targets vulnerable teenagers through school sports programs. John's voice carried the authority of command. He establishes himself in wealthy communities, builds social connections, and gathers compromising information on influential people to protect himself. This is ridiculous. Marcus stood, but John noticed the sweat beading on his forehead. These are obviously fabricated. The offshore accounts are verified by federal banking records. Riley cut in. The sealed complaints were accessed through official channels. Mr. Vale has been running this operation for years, aided by collaborators who help him identify and isolate targets. Victoria's perfectly controlled facade cracked. You have no right to bring your paranoid delusions. Tell them about the photos, Victoria. John's voice was deadly quiet. Tell them how you helped Marcus collect compromising information on their families. Tell them how you forced our daughter to watch your encounters with him, telling her she needed to learn how to control men. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Victoria spun to face Marcus, her eyes wide with panic. You said those files were secure. You promised me. Mrs. Carter, the board president's voice shook. Are you admitting to helping Mr. Vale gather compromising information about families in our community? Victoria's mask shattered completely. You don't understand. Marcus showed me how power really works, how to make people do what you want. All your precious reputations, your social standing, it's all built on lies. We just found a way to use those lies. That's enough. Marcus grabbed his briefcase, heading for the door. This meeting is over. Sit down, Mr. Vale. A man in a suit stood from the back row, holding up a badge. FBI Special Agent Phillips. We're very interested in those offshore accounts Major Riley mentioned, and in your collection of compromising information about minors. The chaos that erupted was precisely what John had planned for. As federal agents emerged from their carefully positioned seats around the room, he watched Victoria's social world implode. Her carefully cultivated allies recoiled from her, their shocked expressions shifting from sympathy to disgust. How dare you? Victoria stormed up to John, her face contorted with rage. You self-righteous bastard. You've ruined everything. No, Victoria. You did that yourself when you chose to help a predator target our daughter. I was teaching her reality, your precious military honor, your rigid morality, they're worthless in the real world. Marcus showed me how to have real power. John looked at his former wife, with cold clarity. The difference between us, Victoria, is that you mistake cruelty for strength. You think gathering dirt on people makes you powerful. I've faced real enemies, fought real battles. What you and Marcus do, it's not power. It's just sophisticated cowardice. Colonel Carter, Agent Phillips approached as other agents led a handcuffed Marcus from the room. We'll need a formal statement from Emily. She's ready. John watched Victoria being read her rights, her expensive suit clashing with the handcuffs. She's stronger than they knew, stronger than they wanted her to be. As the federal agents took control of the scene, John's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Did it work? It worked, he typed back. Your mother and Marcus walked right into the trap. Federal agents are taking them into custody. Are you okay? John looked at Victoria as she was led away, still spitting threats and accusations. The woman he'd married, the mother of his child, was gone if she'd ever really existed at all. "I'm fine," he replied. "The enemy has been neutralized." Riley appeared at his shoulder as the room slowly emptied, shell-shocked board members huddling in disturbed groups. "Hell of an operation, John." Using their own intelligence-gathering habits against them, they thought gathering dirt on people made them invincible. John's voice was grim. They forgot that real warriors know the difference between intelligence and ammunition. You don't just collect information. You use it tactically. "Victoria didn't expect you to fight back like this." "No." She thought my military background made me predictable. She never understood that discipline isn't weakness. It's precision. John straightened his uniform. "Let's go." Emily's waiting. As they left the devastated battlefield of the boardroom, John felt no satisfaction, no triumph. He'd won the engagement, neutralized the threats to his daughter, but the war had left scars that would take time to heal. His phone buzzed again. Emily had sent a photo of herself in his spare military sweatshirt, smiling tentatively at the camera. The sight made something in his chest loosen slightly. They'd survived the battle, and they'd survived the aftermath. Victoria and Marcus had thought themselves tactical geniuses, playing their social chess game with people's lives. They'd never understood that they were facing a real warrior, someone who'd learned strategy in combat zones where the stakes were life and death, but they'd chosen to become predators, targeting the innocent, corrupting the vulnerable. Now they would learn that every predator eventually meets something higher up the food chain, and John Carter had spent his entire military career being that something. The Federal Holding Facility's interview room felt colder than the evening air outside. John sat across from Victoria, studying the woman who'd once been his wife. Her designer outfit looked wilted now, her perfect makeup smudged from angry tears. But her eyes still burned with the same manipulative fire. "Come to gloat." Victoria's voice dripped venom. The righteous military man, destroying his family in the name of honor. "I came to give you one chance," John replied evenly. "Tell the federal agents everything about Marcus's operation. Every family he targeted, every piece of information you helped him gather." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Or what? You've already taken everything. My reputation, my social standing, my freedom. I'm not here to negotiate." John leaned forward. "I'm here because Emily asked me to give you a chance to do one decent thing before this ends." "Emily?" Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. She asked you to come? She still remembers the mother you used to be, before Marcus, before you chose power over your own daughter. I was teaching her strength." Victoria's fist slammed the table. "You kept her weak, sheltered from reality. Marcus showed me how the world really works, how to take what you want, how to make others bend to your will. And that's why you'll never see her again." John stood, his voice cold. "You mistake cruelty for strength, manipulation for power. You helped a predator target children, Victoria. Your own daughter. Marcus is twice the man you are. He understands that morality is for the weak." Victoria's rant cut off as an FBI agent entered the room. "Mrs. Carter, we've finished processing the files from Mr. Vale's private investigator. Would you like to explain the photos we found on your personal laptop?" The blood drained from Victoria's face. "Those were encrypted. Your encryption was weak," John said quietly. "Like everything else you thought made you strong." He left Victoria with the federal agents, her composure finally cracking as they laid out the evidence. In the hallway, Major Riley waited with a grim expression. "Marcus made bail," Riley reported. "His lawyers are good." "Of course they are. He's been blackmailing half the legal community." John checked his phone. No messages from Emily. "Status of the surveillance team?" "In position. If he tries anything, he will." John's voice was certain. Predators like Marcus can't stand to lose control of their targets, especially not when they're exposed. "John?" Riley's voice dropped. "The FBI found something else in those files. Photos of Emily at school, at the mall, timestamps from last week. He's been stalking her even after you moved her to base." The rage that filled John's chest was Arctic cold. "He's testing our defenses. Sending a message. Base security's been upgraded. Emily's safe." "No, John's combat instincts were screaming now. This is his pattern. When exposure's imminent, he escalates. Makes one last grab for control before disappearing to start over somewhere else. His phone rang the base security office. Colonel Carter? Sir, there's been a breach at the south perimeter. And your daughter's not in her quarters. The world narrowed to tactical clarity. Sound the alarm. Full lockdown. I want every camera feed from the last hour. Already done, sir. We found this note in her room. The guard's voice was tight. It's from your wife. John's hands clenched. What does it say? Emily, Marcus, and I can help you understand why your father's rigid morality is a lie. Come to the old warehouse by the river. Time to grow up and learn how the real world works. Victoria is still in federal custody, Riley said sharply. But Emily doesn't know that. John was already moving. Marcus used Victoria's phone, probably from data he gathered during their affair. He's drawing Emily out, using her confusion about her mother against her. Riley fell in a step beside him. The warehouse district's full of abandoned buildings. Perfect territory for an ambush. No. John's voice was steel. Perfect territory for a counter-ambush. Call Agent Phillips. Tell him to hold Victoria in interrogation another hour. I don't want her warning Marcus. You're going to confront him alone. He's expecting the FBI, expecting a tactical team. He's not expecting a father trained in close-quarters combat. John checked his phone's GPS. Emily's smart. She'll have left us a trail. How can you be sure? Because I taught her emergency protocols. If she's ever under duress, make it look like she's complying while leaving markers only I would recognize. They reached John's car just as his phone buzzed a text from Emily's phone. Dad, Mom's right. I'm tired of hiding. Meeting them at the warehouse. Good girl, John murmured, showing Riley the screen. Look at the punctuation. Riley frowned. 2 periods instead of 3 in the ellipsis. Emily's signal. Means she's under observation, but thinking tactically. She'll have sent the same text to base security, making it look like teenage rebellion while alerting us to her situation. Like father, like daughter. Riley managed a grim smile. What's the play? Marcus thinks he's hunting my daughter. John's voice was deadly quiet. Time to teach him the difference between a predator and a warrior. Call your tactical team. Have them set up a perimeter, but stay dark. This ends tonight. As they drove toward the warehouse district, John's mind shifted fully into combat mode. Marcus had spent years perfecting his predatory pattern, using social manipulation and blackmail to target the vulnerable. He thought that made him a tactical genius, but he'd never faced a real tactical operative. Never gone up against someone trained to dismantle enemy operations in actual war zones. Most importantly, he'd never confronted a father whose military expertise was now completely focused on one mission: protecting his daughter. John's phone buzzed with another text from Emily's phone. Getting close. Can't wait to learn the truth about power. 3 periods this time. Emily was signaling that Marcus was close enough to see her phone screen. Good girl, maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence. She's buying us time, John told Riley. Making Marcus think his manipulation is working while leading him exactly where we want him. The student becomes the master. No. John's voice was granite. She's becoming a survivor. Marcus and Victoria wanted to teach her to be a predator. Instead, they taught her to be a warrior. The warehouse district loomed ahead, abandoned buildings casting long shadows in the setting sun. Somewhere in that urban jungle, a predator thought he was closing in on his prey. He was about to learn that some prey bites back, and that nothing in his years of manipulating civilians had prepared him to face a combat-trained father fighting for his child. The hunt was on. But this time, Marcus wasn't the hunter, that he was the target. The warehouse district spread before John like an urban battlefield, a maze of abandoned buildings and twisted metal casting long shadows in the fading light. Every combat instinct he'd honed over 20 years of service screamed that this was perfect ambush territory. But this time, the hunter was about to become the hunted. Teams in position, Riley's voice crackled through his earpiece. We got eyes on all exits. Stay dark, John ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus is expecting law enforcement. Standard tactics. He's not expecting someone who speaks his language of predator and prey. Movement in the east building, another voice reported. Third floor. 2 figures. John's hand tightened on his tactical flashlight. Emily? Confirmed. She's with an adult male. They're moving toward the center of the building. Through his night vision scope, John could see them, his daughter's slight frame and Marcus's larger silhouette outlined against the broken windows. Emily's movements were careful, measured, just as he'd taught her in their emergency drills. She was buying time, playing the confused teenager while leading Marcus exactly where they wanted him. You sure about this plan? Riley's voice held concern. Letting her play bait. She's not bait. John cut him off. She's a soldier executing a tactical maneuver. Marcus thinks he's hurting a scared kid. He's about to learn the difference between prey and a warrior in training. His earpiece crackled again. Emily's voice, pitched perfectly to sound uncertain. I don't understand, Marcus. Where's my mom? You said she'd be here. She's on her way, sweetheart. Marcus's voice oozed false concern. Your father's filled your head with lies about us, Victoria, and I just want to help you understand how the real world works. By kidnapping me? A tremor entered Emily's voice. By forcing me to come here? Force? Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the empty building. You came willingly, didn't you? Just like you've been coming to our private tennis lessons. Your mother's been so pleased with your progress. John's jaw clenched at the implication in Marcus's tone. Through his scope, he could see Emily's hands shake, but her feet were planted in the exact position they'd practiced, drawing Marcus further into the kill zone. There were never any tennis lessons, Emily said, her voice stronger now. Mom lied about that, didn't she? Just like she lied about everything else. Clever girl. Marcus's tone shifted, dropping the concern Minter act. You're sharper than Victoria gives you credit for. She thinks you're weak like your father, all hung up on morality and rules. But I see something else in you, something that could be shaped into what? Another predator like you? Marcus's laugh echoed again. Predator? Such a harsh word. I prefer to think of myself as a teacher, someone who shows privileged little girls like you how power really works. By stalking them? Taking pictures? Blackmailing their families? You've been talking to Daddy's FBI friends, haven't you? Marcus stepped closer to Emily, his posture shifting from mentor to hunter. Did they tell you everything they found in my files? All the dirty little secrets I've collected? Your mother was very helpful with that. She has quite a talent for gathering ammunition. Emily backed up exactly 3 steps the distance they practiced to draw Marcus in an optimal position. She helped you target other girls, didn't she? That's why she wanted me to watch you together. She wanted me to learn to be like her. Victoria understands the natural order of things. Marcus moved forward, following Emily's retreat. The world is divided into predators and prey, sweetheart. Your father's military code, his precious honor, that's for the weak. The strong take what they want. And what do you want, Marcus? The question hung in the air like smoke before a firefight. John watched through his scope as Marcus's predatory smile widened. Smart question. What I want, Emily, is to finish what your mother and I started. To show you what real power feels like. And if your father tries to interfere, Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Emily the screen. Well, I have enough evidence to destroy his career, his reputation, everything he thinks makes him strong. You really don't understand my father at all, do you? Something in Emily's tone made Marcus pause. What do you mean? You think gathering dirt on people makes you powerful. That blackmail and manipulation make you strong. Emily's voice carried clearly through John's earpiece. But my father? He's faced real enemies, fought real battles. What you do? It's just sophisticated cowardice. The words, John's own words from his confrontation with Victoria, hit Marcus like a physical blow. His predatory composure cracked. You little bitch, he snarled, lunging forward. You're just like him, aren't you? Think you're better than me? Better than your mother. Now. John's command was barely a whisper. The warehouse exploded with light as military-grade flashbangs detonated in precisely calculated positions. Marcus staggered, disoriented, as Emily executed the evasion maneuver they'd practiced. 3 steps back, pivot, drop. John was already moving, his years of close-quarters combat training taking over. Marcus was half blind, reaching for where Emily had been, when John's first strike took him in the solar plexus. Security teams, hold position, Riley's voice crackled. Colonel Carter has engaged the target. Marcus swung blindly, his expensive suit jacket tearing as John deflected the blow. You think this changes anything? He gasped. I own this town. One phone call. You're still thinking like a predator. John's voice was cold as he systematically dismantled Marcus's defenses. Still believing your social power means something in a real fight. A wild punch from Marcus met empty air as John stepped inside his guard. The sound of ribs cracking was oddly satisfying. The photos, Marcus wheezed, are in FBI custody, along with your entire operation. John caught Marcus's arm, using the man's own momentum to slam him into a concrete pillar. Victoria's already confessed everything. Your hunting grounds are burned. You can't prove. I'm not here to prove anything. John's next strike dropped Marcus to his knees. I'm here to teach you what happens when you target a warrior's daughter. Marcus tried to reach into his jacket. John caught the glint of metal, a small pistol, exactly where Emily had said he kept it. Really? John's laugh was arctic. You bring a gun to distract from the fact that you're what? A middle-aged tennis coach who gets his kicks terrorizing teenage girls? The pistol clattered away as John disarmed him with clinical precision. Marcus's facade of sophisticated menace had crumbled, leaving only the coward beneath. She's mine. Marcus spat blood. Victoria promised. We had a deal. No. John's voice was death itself. She's my daughter, and you're about to learn why predators fear warriors. The sound of Marcus's arm breaking was very, very final. The sound of approaching sirens filled the warehouse as John knelt beside Emily, who had maintained her tactical position throughout the confrontation. Her hands were steady as she reached for him, showing more strength than fear. You okay, soldier? John asked softly, checking her for any injuries. I'm fine, Dad. I kept to the plan, just like we practiced. Emily's voice held a new confidence. Did you see how he broke when I used Mom's own tactics against him? All that talk about power, but he couldn't handle being the prey instead of the predator. Federal agents swarmed into the building, securing Marcus, who lay groaning on the concrete floor. Agent Phillips approached, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Quite an operation, Colonel Carter. Phillips nodded. Your daughter's performance was crucial to the setup. Those text messages led us right to his phone's location. Emily did more than that, John said proudly. She recognized his psychological warfare tactics and turned them against him. That's not something you can teach. That's pure tactical intuition. Marcus's voice, weak but still venomous, carried across the space. You think this is over? I still have contacts, files your FBI lapdogs haven't found. You mean these? Emily pulled out her phone, showing a screen full of downloaded files. While you were monologuing about power and control, I was downloading everything from your cloud storage. The password wasn't hard to crack. Kingmaker 2024? Really? Mom always said your ego would be your downfall. The color drained from Marcus's face as Agent Phillips took the phone. That's inadmissible. You can't. Actually, we can. Phillips smiled grimly. Your kidnapping attempt gave us probable cause. Everything on that cloud drive is now evidence. Including, he scrolled through the files, well, looks like you kept trophies from your previous hunting grounds. Very thorough records, Mr. Vale. Or should I say, Mr. Vincent? Mr. Prescott? I want my lawyer, Marcus growled. Of course you do. John helped Emily to her feet. But your usual legal team might be compromised considering what's in those files. Amazing how quickly power structures collapse when they're built on blackmail. Major Riley appeared from the shadows, his tactical team securing the perimeter. Federal transport's here for him. And Colonel, you need to hear this. Riley held out his phone, playing a recorded message from the federal holding facility. Victoria's voice, breaking with rage. You promised me protection, she screamed at someone. You said your files would keep us safe. But you never planned to protect me, did you, Marcus? I was just another one of your tools, another stupid woman you used to get to teenage girls. Turn it off, Emily said quietly. I don't need to hear any more. John studied his daughter's face. seeing past the lingering fear to the steel underneath. You sure? It's okay to want answers from her. I already have my answers, Dad. Mom chose power over love, control over family. She helped a predator target other girls, other daughters. There's nothing else I need to know. As federal agents led Marcus away, he made one last attempt to regain control. Emily, tell them about the tennis lessons, about how you came to me willingly. You mean the lessons that never happened? Emily's voice carried clearly through the warehouse. The ones Mom lied about in those fake texts you planted? Here's something you and Mom never understood. Lying about something doesn't make it true. It just makes you a liar. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You're just like your father. All that self-righteous. Thank you. Emily cut him off. Being like my father is the highest compliment you could give me. He's everything you pretend to be, strong, powerful, in control. The difference is he uses his strength to protect people. You use yours to hurt them. John felt something in his chest tighten with pride as Emily turned her back on Marcus, dismissing him as completely as any veteran soldier dismissing a defeated enemy. Agent Phillips? Emily's voice was steady. I'm ready to make my formal statement now. About everything. Mom's involvement, the psychological manipulation, the attempts to isolate me from Dad. All of it. Phillips nodded respectfully. Of course. And Emily? That was some impressive tactical work tonight. You got your father's instincts. As they walked toward the waiting federal vehicles, Emily leaned against John's side. Did you see his face when he realized he'd lost control? When he understood that his whole power structure was built on lies? You did that, John said quietly. You saw through his tactical weakness, his need to brag, to prove his dominance. Classic predator behavior. I had a good teacher. Emily managed a small smile. All those emergency drills, the tactical training you disguised as games when I was little. You were preparing me, weren't you? Teaching me to think like a warrior instead of a victim. I was teaching you to survive. John helped her into one of the federal SUVs. Your mother, she wanted to teach you to be a predator. I wanted to teach you to be strong without being cruel. There's a difference between power and strength, between control and discipline. I understand that now. Emily's voice held conviction. Mom and Marcus, they thought gathering dirt on people made them powerful. But real power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself, about using your strength to protect instead of harm. As they drove through the night toward the federal building where Emily would make her statement, John watched his daughter's reflection in the window. The scared, withdrawn girl of a few months ago was gone, replaced by someone who had faced her own predators and emerged stronger. Dad. Emily's voice was thoughtful. Do you think Mom really believed in what she was doing? That she was teaching me some kind of twisted life lesson? Your mother lost her way long before Marcus, John said carefully. She confused power with cruelty, strength with dominance. By the time she met him, she was ready to believe that his predatory behavior was somehow enlightened, that helping him target vulnerable girls made her powerful instead of complicit. Will you ever forgive her? No. John's voice was final. Some choices can't be unmade. Some lines can't be uncrossed. She didn't just betray our marriage. She betrayed her duty as a mother, as a human being. She helped a predator target children, including her own daughter. That's not something that gets forgiveness. Emily nodded slowly. I understand. And honestly, I don't want to forgive her either. Not after seeing those files, realizing how many other girls she helped him isolate and manipulate. She wasn't just his victim. She was his spotter, his recruiter. You're allowed to mourn who you thought she was, John said gently. The mother you remembered from before. That's just it. I'm not sure that mother ever really existed. Maybe this is who she always was, and we just couldn't see it. Emily's hand found his. But I got lucky. I got a father who taught me the difference between being strong and being cruel. As the federal building loomed ahead, John squeezed his daughter's hand. They had survived the battle, outmaneuvered the predators who had targeted their family. Now came the harder part. Rebuilding, healing, moving forward, but they would do it together, as they had faced everything else. Not as predator and prey, but as warriors who had faced their enemies and emerged victorious. Victoria and Marcus had thought themselves masters of power and control. Instead, they had learned the oldest lesson in warfare: that true strength lies not in the ability to harm, but in the choice to protect. 3 months after the warehouse confrontation, John stood in the federal courthouse corridor, watching Emily adjust her blazer before taking the stand. The preliminary hearings had revealed the full scope of Marcus's operation. Dozens of victims across multiple states, a network of enablers like Victoria, who helped him identify and isolate vulnerable teenagers. "You ready for this?" John asked, noting how his daughter's hands remained steady despite the pressure. "I'm ready." Emily's voice carried the quiet confidence she'd developed since that night. "The other girls need to know they're not alone, that someone fought back and won." Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat between his lawyers, his expensive suit unable to hide how small he looked without his predatory power. Victoria sat separately with her own legal team, her perfectly maintained appearance a stark contrast to the defeat in her eyes. That as Emily took the stand, John watched his ex-wife flinch at the strength in their daughter's voice. The scared, withdrawn girl Victoria had tried to manipulate was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood the difference between power and strength. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Emily Carter. And could you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Marcus Vale?" Emily's eyes met Marcus's, unflinching. "He was my mother's lover. She brought him into our lives as part of their plan to, in their words, teach me about power and control." "Could you elaborate on that plan?" "My mother, Victoria Carter, helped Marcus identify and isolate vulnerable girls through her social connections. She would gain their trust, learn their weaknesses, then help him exploit those weaknesses." Emily's voice remained steady. "In my case, she forced me to watch their encounters, telling me I needed to learn how to manipulate men the way she did." Victoria's lawyer stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating about my client's motivations." "No, I'm quoting her directly," Emily cut in. "I have the text messages where she spelled out their plans. They're part of the evidence package, along with the files I downloaded from Marcus's cloud storage that night." The judge overruled the objection, and Emily continued, detailing months of psychological warfare. She described how Victoria and Marcus had worked together to break down her confidence, to isolate her from her father, to create a paper trail of fake tennis lessons and manufactured encounters. "And what made you finally tell your father what was happening?" Emily's eyes found John's. "I remembered something he taught me during our emergency drills, that predators rely on isolation, on making their targets feel alone and powerless. The day I finally told him was the day I stopped being a target and became a warrior." Marcus's lawyer tried to challenge her testimony, to paint her as a confused teenager misinterpreting innocent situations. Emily dismantled each attempt with tactical precision. "You claim my client was inappropriate, and yet you continued to attend private tennis lessons." "There were no tennis lessons," Emily replied calmly. "Check the country club records. The Times mom claimed I was having lessons. Marcus was actually with her. They created a false narrative to explain why he was around me so often." Classic predator technique. Establishing a legitimate seeming reason for access to targets. "And these so-called emergency drills your father taught you were the reason I survived?" Emily's voice carried through the courtroom. "While you were studying law, my father studied tactical warfare. He taught me to think like a warrior instead of a victim. That's how I helped the FBI trap your client, by using his own predatory tactics against him." The cross-examination continued, but Emily never wavered. John watched Victoria's composure crack as their daughter methodically exposed every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to corrupt her into becoming another predator like them. During a recess, Agent Phillips approached John in the corridor. "Your daughter's testimony is devastating their defense. Marcus's other victims are coming forward, inspired by her strength." "She's not just strong," John replied. "She's tactical. Every answer targets their psychological warfare strategy, exposes their methodology. Like father, like daughter." Phillips smiled grimly. "Victoria's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal. Seems your ex-wife doesn't like being on the receiving end of exposure." John watched Emily talking with other witnesses, young women who had survived Marcus's predation, who were finding their own warrior spirits. Let her plea. Emily's testimony isn't about punishment anymore. It's about showing other targets they can fight back. The trial proceeded for another week, with Emily's testimony forming the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Marcus's carefully constructed empire of manipulation crumbled as victim after victim came forward, emboldened by the example of a teenager who had turned a predator's tactics against him. Victoria accepted a plea deal, trading a reduced sentence for detailed testimony about Marcus's operation. When she tried to speak to Emily during another recess, her daughter's response was pure tactical precision. Save your manipulations, Mom. You chose to be a spotter to help him target girls like me. Any mother who helps a predator hunt children isn't a mother at all. The day the verdict came down, John and Emily stood together as Marcus was led away to begin his sentence. Victoria, already in custody under her plea agreement, watched them with desperate eyes. "Emily, please," she called out. "I did it for you, to make you strong." "No," Emily's voice was steel. "You did it for yourself because you mistake cruelty for strength. Dad taught me what real strength looks like. It's about protecting others, not exploiting them." Outside the courthouse, Emily paused on the steps, looking out over the city. "It's really over, isn't it?" "This battle is," John agreed. "But you've started something bigger. Those other girls, the ones coming forward now, they're learning what you learned. That being a target doesn't mean staying a victim. We should help them," Emily said thoughtfully. "Create some kind of support network. Teach them the tactical awareness you taught me. Turn more targets into warriors." John felt pride swell in his chest. His daughter had faced psychological warfare and emerged not just survived but transformed. Victoria and Marcus had tried to make her a predator like them. Instead, they had forged a protector. "Dad," Emily's voice held new purpose. "Remember what you said about some choices being unforgivable?" "I do. I've been thinking about that. Mom and Marcus won't get forgiveness, but maybe we can give their victims something better, the strength to fight back, to protect others." John nodded slowly. From prey to protector. "That's a tactical evolution I can support." As they walked to the car, John reflected on how far they'd come from that first morning when he'd noticed Emily's fear. Victoria and Marcus had thought themselves masters of power, experts in control. They had never understood that true strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about standing between predators and their prey. They had tried to corrupt his daughter's soul, to turn her into another link in their chain of exploitation. Instead, they had helped forge something far more powerful. A warrior who understood that real strength lay not in the ability to hurt, but in the choice to protect. The war for Emily's soul was over. The predators were caged, their hunting grounds destroyed. And in their place stood something they had never counted on. A father and daughter united not by blood alone, but by the warrior's code. They shared some battles left scars, but these scars had purpose. They were reminders that every predator, eventually, met their match. That for every hunter who sought to harm the innocent, there were warriors ready to stand in their way, and in the end, that was the only power that...
Story 4. On a late Friday evening in my office, I was assessing a few candidates who had heard about an upcoming vacancy in our office staff. I served as the regional head of a chemical company supplying products for control, fertilizer, and water containment for soil. Our company relied heavily on farmers who cultivated or supplied our food. Being environmentally conscious, we proudly boasted our products as completely eco-friendly, a pioneering move in our industry. 2 of my office staff's spouses had been promoted, prompting them to tender their resignations. Both would be relocating within the next 3 months, sparking a rush to fill their positions swiftly. Our sales team operated across 8 states in the heart of the nation. Surpassing our sales projections this year was a significant achievement. Kathy, my executive assistant, popped her head into my office to inform me, "Ed, all 8 candidates have confirmed their interview appointments for Monday. I'm off for the night." Every Thursday, I traveled to one of the states under my jurisdiction to conduct a half-day sales meeting on Fridays before returning home. Consequently, Thursday nights had become my wife's designated evening to socialize with her friends, albeit incurring considerable babysitting expenses over the years. My weekly excursions provided crucial face-to-face support for our sales representatives, fostering their job performance and problem-solving skills. This investment had yielded substantial returns over the years, with not a single resignation in 8 years, an accomplishment for our company. Today, I had just made it back in time to wrap up a few tasks before heading home. The company had persistently urged me to relinquish this aspect of my role, but I found the solitude during these trips invaluable for contemplation. With a wife who knew everything and 3 children, these moments of quiet reflection during drives were invaluable, besides sparing the branch the expense of hiring a sales manager. Maintaining a record of staying under budget was a priority for me. With our children in junior and senior high school, our eldest, a source of immense pride, set to graduate and attend Southeast Missouri University in the fall, our family was in a favorable position. Her full scholarship awarded by my employer was a significant boon. Our youngest daughter, just 16, was busy preparing for her learner's permit. Grace, my wife of 20 years, served as the executive assistant to the district attorney since our youngest's birth. The district attorney had recently been offered a lucrative position with the federal government, which he promptly accepted. Known for his no-nonsense approach, it was a no-brainer, given the substantial increase in salary. Despite being roughly the same age as me, he had never married. Contrary to rumors, I doubted he was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had graciously taken our 3 children every second weekend of the month, affording my wife and me some much-needed quality time together. This gesture came at a pivotal moment in our marriage, allowing us to rediscover ourselves and ultimately strengthening our bond. Without their support, we might have added to the divorce statistics. They had approximately 3 months left before this chapter would close, as my eldest, Amy, was set to intern in our senator's office in Washington over the summer before embarking on her political science studies at the university. A while back, my dad, on a whim, purchased Ancestry.com kits for each of our 3 children, with my consent, and submitted them as a jest. Following their guidelines, we understood that a match would only occur if a relative had also submitted their DNA. My children discussed it with me, and I granted permission, acknowledging that we all have distant relatives we might not know about. Perhaps it would lead us on a new journey. Amy suggested keeping it a surprise for her mother until we received the results, aware it could take 5 or 6 months. This weekend we were traveling to Nashville to attend the Grand Ole Opry and would return home on Sunday. It was my wife who organized this special trip, aiming to create another cherished memory in our journey together. Update. During my final year at university, I crossed paths with my wife, Grace, at a football game. Contrary to being a player on the field, I was one of those anonymous vendors peddling overpriced snacks to the crowd. Grace, being one of the daughters of the team's medical staff, always had complimentary tickets at her disposal. An altercation ensued between her and her date over a trivial matter, resulting in a shove that inadvertently involved me. As she pushed him away, he collided with me, sending me tumbling down the concrete stairs with my food tray in tow. I regained consciousness in the hospital, my head swathed in bandages, the doctor informing me of 25 stitches due to a split forehead. Grace visited me daily, burdened with guilt, and met my entire family during my recovery from a week-long coma caused by internal injuries. As the haze lifted from my sight, I perceived an unfamiliar goddess-like figure before me, initially mistaking her for a celestial being guiding me to the afterlife. Yet the reality of my girlfriend, Esmeralda, standing by her side brought clarity, albeit disappointment to her reaction. Hoping it was all a dream, I drifted back into sleep, yearning for Esmeralda's absence upon awakening, a wish that materialized when I opened my eyes to find her gone, replaced by Grace, who steadfastly supported me as I pieced my life back together. Though I never formally asked her, our relationship naturally evolved, culminating in marriage 3 months later as Grace walked down the aisle, captivating with her 5'8" stature, long blonde locks, deep blue-black eyes, and an enviable figure. By our 5th year together, we found ourselves at a crossroads, contemplating separation without fully comprehending the reasons behind our drift. Despite my confusion, Grace and I remained committed, eventually resolving to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. We had just departed from Lambert's on our way home, a restaurant coasting on its reputation. Their claim to fame was tossing large buns across the room for customers to catch, overshadowing the otherwise lackluster, overcooked food. We made the stop at this tourist trap because it evoked memories of my wife's mother's cooking. Need I say more? Grace initiated a conversation with me, expressing her thoughts on the concept of infidelity within our marriage. She suggested that I should explore the idea of having an affair, indicating that she would approve of it. Grace reasoned that societal norms regarding marriage vows had changed and that I should reconsider my stance. She believed that such an experience might enrich our relationship and deepen our understanding of each other. Her perspective troubled me, suggesting a willingness to exploit others for personal gratification, a stance I couldn't accept. It revealed a side of her I hadn't seen before, reshaping my perceptions considerably. "Let me ask you this, my dear wife," I countered. "Why is it so important to you that I have your blessing for an affair? Have I done something so repulsive that you're seeking a reason to end our marriage?" 5 minutes of silence ensued before I resumed the music, her lack of response speaking volumes. Grace was always quick with an answer, but now she was silent, leaving me to ponder why. I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife's sudden approval of an affair was significant, though its motive remained elusive. Regardless, I was convinced something was amiss in our lives and resolved to uncover it. Driving for an hour, we were about 40 miles from home when Grace again silenced the sound. I switched on the recorder once more. "I apologize, Ed," she said. "I suppose I've been indulging in too many Harlequin romance stories. Those notions must have come from out of nowhere." Having said that, she resumed the sound system, assuming the matter was settled. However, the dilemma arose from the fact that both our children and I knew she despised those books, as they had been her mother's favorite. Throughout her life, she had dismissed them as lowbrow and beneath her. Whenever her mother passed the latest editions to her, Grace would promptly discard them. During the last leg of our drive, I realized the only aspect of her life I knew little about was her Thursday night outings with her friends. It hadn't seemed significant or concerning enough to inquire about. On the rare occasions when I was home, she willingly altered her plans to spend the evening with me. Until today, I had no reason to doubt those nights, as I had complete trust in her. However, following our recent conversation, I found myself questioning the nature of her girls' night out. Was she frequenting bars with her friends, engaging in questionable activities like one-night stands? By the time we arrived home, I resolved to uncover the truth about her Thursday night outings. After settling in at home, I spent some time with my parents, enjoying their company and hearing about their weekend activities. They mentioned wanting to have a private chat with me the following day, expressing concern about my wife and her youngest daughter, but didn't elaborate further. We agreed to meet around 3 o'clock when I would be available after my job interviews. Later, when saying goodbye, I assured them I'd address their concerns after work. Once they left, I informed my wife about the plan to visit my parents the next day to fix something, ensuring she was aware of the potential delay for dinner. She acknowledged it, assuring me it was fine to eat later. My dad and mom arrived promptly, and we ushered them into my office. After settling in, we waited for one of the staff to bring us coffee. Once served, Kathy closed the door as she left. "Ed," my dad began, "I deeply regret sending in our grandchildren's DNA. They found a match for April. She has a grandmother on her father's side searching for her son and his descendants." With that, he produced the form from Ancestry.com, displaying a lady's name and phone number. I was devastated, and my father could see the impact the news had on me. "Dad, I don't believe it's a mistake. Let's see what we can find out together," I said. Using the office phone, I dialed the number and activated both the recording and speaker functions to ensure a permanent record of the conversation. After 2 rings, someone answered. "I'm Edward Paul Adams, seeking Mrs. Beatrice Smith regarding a DNA match from Ancestry.com, I explained. "May I speak with her?" "You're speaking with her, young man," came the reply. "What can I do for you?" "It's complicated," I replied. "Long story short, I've just learned that my youngest daughter is your granddaughter." "Are you referring to April Marie Adams?" she asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Then perhaps you know my son, whom I had to give up for adoption at 15, Mrs. Smith continued. "I might if I knew his name," I responded. He was adopted by a family named Barrow. His given names were Luke Robert, Mrs. Smith revealed. My heart sank. My parents and I recognized the name all too well. Her candid admission had turned into a nightmare for me. He's alive and well, I disclosed. Currently, he serves as the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss. And now, I think I understand why he never married. He's my only child, Mrs. Smith confessed. I'm battling stage 4 lung cancer and don't have much time left. Would you allow April to visit me before I pass away? If needed, I'll cover the expenses. I want to meet her and pass on my estate to her. Given the circumstances, I'll let you coordinate with my parents. They'll arrange for her to visit this weekend, I agreed. But I can't let her travel alone. Is there anything else you need? Please provide a notary statement for my lawyer to conduct a DNA test, Mrs. Smith requested. He'll want to verify her identity before changing my will, given the value of her inheritance. No problem. I'll hand over the call to my dad and he'll handle the details, I assured her. Exiting my office, I handed Kathy my personal recorder, instructing her to transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone call. This is necessary for the divorce proceedings, I added. Do you want the authorization for the DNA test drawn up too? Kathy inquired, demonstrating her keen awareness of the situation. Yes, please, but keep it quiet for a few weeks. I want to investigate my soon-to-be ex-wife's Thursday night activities, I replied. Turning to my assistant, David, I requested his and his wife's cooperation for a personal matter, signaling the seriousness of the situation. Shorty should be finishing her dispatch soon. I'll text her to come over right away, David responded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. I returned to my office and we reached an agreement. Using the spare key they had for my house, they planned to pack some clothes for April and leave next Friday. I'd have her pulled out of school and drop her off at their place by 10 o'clock. As I saw my parents off, David's wife entered. I directed her to his office, where I'd join them shortly. Thanks to modern communication methods, Kathy had already made copies and transcribed the documents. I handed David and Cheryl a copy, suggesting they start with my conversation with my wife. I gave Kathy the paperwork my dad had provided to make copies for my lawyer's files, instructing her to find the best. Cheryl and David, longtime acquaintances, were deeply affected by recent revelations concerning my wife and me. Cheryl, particularly, had a close relationship with Grace, having grown up as neighbors. The discovery of the truth had left them both shocked. We discussed potential actions to uncover more information. I suggested a plan involving David using my company car for sales trips, while Cheryl would use David's car with the pretext of cross-training for the next 3 months. Meanwhile, I planned to follow my wife on Thursday nights to gather evidence discreetly. My suspicion grew as I recounted recent events, particularly Grace's suggestion for me to have an affair. I speculated that she might be planning to move with Luke Robert Barrow, which could lead to justifying a divorce in her eyes if she could prove my infidelity. Cheryl expressed her agreement and suggested involving the police to gather more detailed information about their activities. She even mentioned a contact who could help arrange it. Later, Kathy informed us about Dale Allen Britton's departure from the district attorney's office and his new practice. Cheryl asked me to convey her regards to Dale when I visited him. In summary, we devised a plan to uncover more information and sought legal counsel to handle the situation. I left to meet Dale, a man involved in the women's right to life movement, challenging Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. His unconventional approach to the law was shaking up everything he touched. Things started to make sense. My marital issues with Grace coincided with her employment under Luke Barrow, around the time I was promoted to sales manager, requiring frequent overnight sales meetings. If they were indeed having an affair every Thursday night, I had unknowingly been deceived for over 15 years. The expensive gifts from Luke to Grace now seemed suspicious. Dale was ready for me when I arrived. Cheryl had briefed him on our plans. He provided me with access to Luke Barrow's house and the alarm code. Handing me a phone number, he said it would connect me with helpful services at a reasonable price. Having grown up on the streets, Dale still had connections to get things done. The access codes he provided would remain valid until the end of the week, after which Luke would be reminded to change them. Dale planned to sue Barrow for child support from April's birth, potentially bankrupting him under state law. He also suggested temporarily transferring my parental authority to my parents until the court case concluded to prevent accusations of manipulation. I offered to pay him up front, but he declined, fearing Grace would detect it. Instead, he requested a check to be cashed after the legal proceedings commenced. His strategic thinking assured me that he had my best interests at heart. I left with the impression that Dale had his own motives for targeting Luke Barrow. Both Grace and Luke were in for a rude awakening. Dale Britton had devised his own strategy for the divorce proceedings. Update. I completed all necessary paperwork, granting my parents parental rights over April starting Friday, and provided them with a copy. After Dale and I briefed them on the situation, they agreed it was the right move. I waited for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus as David was away on his first sales trip. Cheryl would leave her car with me and take David's home. My eldest informed me that their mother wouldn't be home for dinner, joining her friends straight from work. Once Cheryl arrived, we swapped cars, and I packed my suitcase in the trunk. "Ed," Cheryl said, "dispatch and the guys are ready. Just tell me where to go." "Thanks," I replied. "Dale wants me to call him if we proceed so he can serve them personally. I'm curious about Dale's vendetta against Luke Barrow." "Dale's all about principles," Cheryl explained. "Luke's known for not sticking to his word." It was intriguing to observe Grace and Luke depart in separate cars, meeting later at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Afterward, they went their separate ways. I positioned myself near Luke Barrow's residence, with Dale's associates, now my team, fully prepared. I had a clear view of Luke's house from a safe location. Grace arrived first, disabling the alarm with a code and unlocking the door. We recorded her entering. Moments later, Luke pulled in and Grace greeted him at the door. Her blouse was open, braless, revealing her cleavage. Luke embraced her, kissing passionately. As they entered, I ceased filming. 6 rooms in Luke's house were wired for audio and video, courtesy of his neighbor's son serving time. Everything inside was streamed live on their Facebook pages. They were monitoring my car, expecting me to seek a new romantic interest. Anticipating this, they had hired a courtesan who matched my preferences. I alerted Cheryl, who informed David. As an ex-Marine, he skillfully veered off-road safely at 10 p.m., then called for assistance. Cheryl notified me, and I confirmed the green light, providing the address. While awaiting developments, I tampered with the valves in their car tires, ensuring they couldn't escape the predicament they were about to face. The adulterous pair wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. The police officers arrived, sirens blaring, and banged on the door, seeking Grace Adams. Luke Barrows initially denied her presence until the cops pointed out her car in the driveway. Grace eventually appeared, clad only in a bedsheet. "Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband Edward Paul's car was in a motor vehicle accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. We were directed to check here by your parents when we couldn't locate you," the officer stated, intentionally misleading her. Grace's face paled at the news. As the police departed, I followed closely behind. Every moment from their arrival to departure was recorded and streamed live on Facebook, providing irrefutable evidence of the ongoing affair to the citizens of Cape. At midnight, my daughter Amy called in distress, reporting that her mother hadn't returned home and wasn't answering calls. I advised her to contact Luke Barrow and insisted he put Grace on the phone. "Why him?" Amy questioned. "He's been her Thursday night companion for over 16 years, I revealed. After sending Amy a clip of Grace and Luke's encounter with the police, she soon discovered her mother's deception. Upon Amy's revelation, I instructed her to open the front door, preparing to confront Grace. As I retrieved my suitcase from the car, Dale Allen Britton called, informing me he had served restraining orders against Grace and Luke, prohibiting them from coming near us. "Amy, open the garage so I can park Cheryl's car inside," I instructed, pretending to be on my way to Little Rock. We complied with the plan. Amy questioned the recent locksmith visit, to which I confirmed it was part of our preparations, prompted by the DNA test my father submitted to Ancestry.com, revealing a match for April, and uncovering Grace's connection to her boss, who turned out to be the son she gave up for adoption at 15. Amy, my daughter, became emotional. I embraced her tightly until she regained composure. Then we dimmed the lights and retreated to the kitchen for a private conversation. I activated my voice recorder and played the discussion between her mother and me during our return journey from Nashville. It provided Amy with insight into her mother's words firsthand. "Why would Mom encourage you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy inquired. "To mitigate the consequences of her own actions if they were ever exposed," I replied. Ironically, her suggestion led to the truth emerging. A soft knock interrupted us. Since I wasn't expected to be home, Amy answered the door. It was a police officer who informed us that they had intercepted a taxi carrying Grace. They warned her of violating a court order if she proceeded further. Throughout the night, my eldest daughter and I discussed Grace's actions. We both agreed that given her talent for storytelling during her girls' night out, she should have pursued a career in writing. Amy expressed disbelief at the revelation that her mother had been having an affair with the same man for over 16 years. She wondered why they hadn't noticed sooner. I explained that it was easy to overlook because the kids were young, and I frequently traveled for work, trusting in our relationship and seeing no reason to question Grace's activities. Amy reflected on how their trust in Grace had blinded them to the truth. Realizing the extent of Grace's manipulation, I was stunned. Amy pointed out that the most painful aspect was how Grace had exploited their trust to maintain her affair. As Amy went to make coffee, I noticed the dawn approaching and received a text from Grace, urgently requesting to talk about a family issue concerning our oldest child before my return from the trip. Deciding how to respond, I reassured Amy and replied to Grace's message, declining her manipulation and informing her that she could continue her plans with Luke Barrow, but without the kids. I explained that Grace had wanted me to start an affair to use against me in divorce court and never expected to be caught after so many years. It must have been painful for Amy to hear the truth. Many struggle to accept harsh realities. Eventually, they will come to terms with it. I embraced my daughter as she shed tears once more. We had just calmed her down when Eric and April woke up. I turned on the kitchen TV to watch the morning news. Soon they joined us for breakfast, surprised to see me at home. We were all taken aback when my wife's image appeared on the screen. My son raised the volume out of curiosity. My heart went out to my kids as they heard Grace and Luke disparaging me, calling me foolish and clueless. Their mother then made a sarcastic comment about me, which caused both of them to burst into laughter. The reporter interjected, suggesting that they weren't laughing anymore after the scheme they had orchestrated to set up Edward Adams with a professional escort had backfired. The scene shifted to Dale serving them both with lawsuits, with the news reporter elaborating on the details. Alice ran to me sobbing and sat on my lap, discovering in a harsh way that her biological father wasn't her father, but her mother's long-term lover. Eric summed it up aptly, questioning what their mother's view of their father meant for the rest of them. Once April had composed herself, Amy and I explained what had occurred since their mother and I returned from Nashville. I arranged for them to be excused from school on Friday and Monday to process their emotions. Just as we were about to start breakfast, April exclaimed that the police chief was on the line. That caught our attention, so we turned up the volume. It was publicly announced that both Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, were under criminal investigation. A special team from across the county was assembled to lead the inquiry. I thought to myself that when one's private actions become public, society cannot overlook them. Hypocrisy reigns in our society every day. After breakfast and tidying up, I had my 3 children sit down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my dad had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological dad's mother. She's terminally ill and has requested to see you. There's a significant reason behind it, but I think it's best for the lady you're meeting to explain it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. If you have any questions, ask your grandparents." "Amy, can you assist your sister in packing for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. Once the girls left, my son asked, "How are you handling this, Dad?" "I'm struggling," I admitted. "I'm constantly fighting to keep myself composed. Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With that said, I called my parents and explained my whereabouts. They said they would come over as soon as they finished packing their car. They still had an hour before their flight. It was in that moment that my sons and my relationship changed forever, for the better. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed fervently that it would go well and that she would return feeling the same about me. The atmosphere at the local district attorney's office resembled a morgue. Grace Adams had gone out to buy new clothes after having her car towed and the 4 tires' stems replaced. Meanwhile, Luke Barrow was reviewing the lawsuit against him. Although they lacked a direct DNA sample, the biological link was undeniable, leaving him unable to deny parentage. The truth about their relationship and long-term affair had become known to everyone on staff. This, along with concealing April Adams's true parentage, was turning into a political nightmare. Fraud under the law had evolved to encompass the failure to disclose all pertinent facts, leading Dale to sue both Grace and Luke jointly in a civil suit. It increasingly appeared that they had been deceiving Grace's husband, Ed, for years. While many lawyers affirmed Ed Adams and Dale Britton's likely success, those contacted so far were unwilling to get involved, likely due to Dale's formidable reputation in court. The Facebook exposure of their conduct and their admission of attempting to ruin an honest man to benefit themselves was headline news, given Ed's societal position. Grace, having frequented a familiar clothing store for years, never anticipated being confronted by a woman accusing her of insanity, claiming she should have foreseen the consequences. This revelation came when the lady accused her of appearing in compromising photos on Facebook for hours. Upon returning to Luke's house, Grace found a company finishing a service call, assuming she was the homeowner and suggesting resetting the security codes. Only later did she realize the lack of electronic signature verification. Calling Luke, Grace questioned who was trying to sabotage his new position in St. Louis, prompting her to reveal her discoveries. They both suspected deeper motives beyond Ed protecting himself, given the political nature of his new job. After making coffee, Grace reviewed the divorce petition. It stung to realize that her own words had aroused her husband's suspicions, especially her requests for him to deliberately damage others. Furthermore, the revelation from Mom and Dad Adams about the Ancestry.com DNA match exposed April's true parentage, offering undeniable proof of her affair and potentially jeopardizing their marriage before April's birth. At that moment, she realized Ed needed to know if the affair was ongoing. He had orchestrated the events of the previous night, revealing hidden truths about her life. Just as she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. Rising, she answered it to find the neighbor Luke disliked. "Mr. Primrose," she greeted, "what can I do for you?" Handing her a legal envelope, he explained, "Ed used my place as a base for his operations against you and your long-term lover last night. I permitted it gladly as Luke Barrow had my son sentenced to the maximum. The information in this envelope shared with you last night will also be delivered to everyone on your side of the family this afternoon. Ed asked if you're still laughing at him." Watching him walk away with a broad smile, Grace returned to the kitchen and opened the envelope, filled with incriminating pictures. They depicted her entering Luke's house with her key, greeting him at the door, engaging in lovemaking activities, and being confronted by police officers. Ed's team was efficient, making it seem like he collaborated with police officers seeking retribution against Luke. The final signed page by her husband revealed the potential for significant public fallout, jeopardizing her plans to assert control over him. Now the priority was damage control to mitigate the fallout from Ed's public disclosure. Grace. By last Sunday evening, upon returning home from Nashville, it became apparent to me that you were scheming to orchestrate our divorce. Since then, I've been trying to discern what led your affection for me to transform into pure animosity. Now I understand the reason behind it. I realize you hold me responsible for what you perceive as deficiencies in your life during the period when we only had our 2 children. It seems you felt confined in our marriage and yearned for the carefree days of being single again. Otherwise, you wouldn't have willingly sought solace in another man to relive the single life. By doing so, you allowed him to temporarily whisk you away from what you despised a few hours each week. I recognize that the sole reason you remained in a marriage with a man you despised and saw as lifeless was because Luke didn't want the burden of raising kids, not even his own. With your perception of me, there was no way you'd leave the children alone with someone you considered worthless. Your pride wouldn't allow it, leading you to endure a lifetime of deliberate falsehoods. Every day you both evaded consequences, your disdain for me grew. I became increasingly foolish and incompetent in your eyes. How much laughter did you and Luke share at the expense of the oblivious betrayed man? Did you boost his affection for you by belittling or mocking me? What I can't forgive or forget is the message you and the one you regard as your true husband have conveyed to our children, as it will shape their lives indefinitely. I've yet to comprehend the extent of amusement Luke and you derived from manipulating me and our children's lives as if we were mere pawns on a chessboard. The KVOS 12 news reporter aptly captured this when questioning whether you still found amusement in Edward Adams, husband of Grace Adams. I observed Amy, Eric, and April witnessing as you and your lover publicly disclosed your intentions towards me through the media. It was heartbreaking to witness our children as you casually joked about how effortless it would be to bring down the foolish idiot. Our son Eric remarked, "If Mom sees you as nothing but trash to be discarded, what does she really think of us?" I haven't broached the topic of your future relationship with them yet. Currently, it's fair to say it's non-existent due to your and Luke's profound disgust and contempt towards me. At least we're both aware that you derive joy from leaving me branded as a clueless fool for life. Perhaps tonight you and Luke can celebrate your victory with a toast. Ed, update. Grace's hands began to tremble so violently that she dropped the paper. She appeared spiteful, bitter, and cruel, showing no concern for her children, husband, or anyone else. It was evident that she cared only about herself and satisfying her carnal desires. Her sobs shattered the room's silence. Ed had a knack for undermining one's credibility without direct condemnation. His observations about their conduct left no room for dispute among readers. In his view, every action she took was to sustain her lifestyle, not out of love. He likely realized that Luke was urging her to leave him and the children before April's conception. Luke's new job forced them to accelerate their plans, originally set for after April's high school graduation. While she wasn't laughing anymore, Ed effectively pointed out that their actions validated his words. Ed believed their disdain for him prompted their attempt to destroy him. Without explicitly stating it, it was a declaration of war. If he went down, he'd take them down with him. Grace resumed reading the divorce petition, finding it utterly devastating. One of the suits accused them of fraud for concealing April's true parentage. The damages sought in the fraud case made her feel sick. If Ed won, both she and Luke would face financial ruin. Ed and his lawyer were proving that they could no longer underestimate him as the fool they believed him to be. Update. Saturday was chaotic for my two eldest children and me. From early morning until around 4 in the afternoon, we had family members dropping by. Grace's parents, her 2 brothers, 1 sister, and their spouses came to offer their support, each bringing one of their favorite dishes to ensure we had something to eat. Even my brother and sister visited from out of town to check up on me. The 3 of us were enveloped in love and support. Each visitor found it difficult to grasp how they could have been deceived by Grace for so long. They all agreed that what had surfaced on social media proved she was trying to destroy me out of hatred. My father-in-law and I went onto the back deck for a moment, where he suggested I let go of whatever was bothering me. He assured me that Cora would keep others away until I felt better and stayed with me until I calmed down. He mentioned plans to revise his will, intending to divide Grace's share among my 3 children. He expressed his disappointment in Grace's actions, stating that he could never forgive her for what she had become. Later, my father called to inform me that April had met the lady and that their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith seemed interested in our family's situation and helped April open up about her feelings. The lawyer obtained the necessary blood sample and had a private chat with my father. They discussed Luke Barrow, and my father shared what we knew about him. It was revealed that Luke's real father was serving a life sentence for a serious crime, and April's arrival had a significant impact on his inheritance. I assured my father that Dale Britton had taken legal measures to keep Luke away from us. Our day had been busy with family members from both sides offering support. My parents were staying as guests at Mrs. Smith's estate, where April was currently with her. They liked Mrs. Smith, and her lawyer mentioned that seeing April had brought a smile to her face after a long time. My mom then spoke to me, mentioning a conversation she had with Mrs. Smith about me and expressing gratitude for how we handled the situation. Mrs. Smith planned to leave everything in a trust for April to be managed by me until she turned 25. Before ending the call, I requested that my parents text me when they were leaving so I could be there when they brought April home. I messaged April, letting her know that we all miss her and sending our love, Dad. Finally, we found time to clean up before David and Cheryl arrived with my car. I apologized to Cheryl for forgetting to return it. Cheryl mentioned that the police chief saw an opportunity to bring down Luke Barrow and that he and Dale were collaborating. Dale had provided some questionable items for the investigators to examine. David shared that the atmosphere at the office was heavy, and everyone was upset upon his return. He informed them generally that some of them had been aware of the situation for most of the week and were offering assistance where possible. I commented that it had been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night, and that the kids were still struggling at times, so I planned to take Monday off too. Cheryl inquired if I had heard from Grace, to which I responded that I hadn't since Thursday night. I speculated that Luke and she were probably busy moving on with their lives, as they had publicly made it clear how they saw us. Early Sunday morning, my youngest daughter called to ask if it was okay for her and her grandparents to return home late on Monday. I agreed, pending her grandparents' approval. She thanked me for insisting she go and explained that Mrs. Smith had helped her accept that it wasn't her fault because her mother's affair had brought her into the world. She expressed her love for me before hanging up. Amy, Eric, and I observed as my parents arrived in our driveway on Monday evening. They appeared stressed and weary. As soon as my mom stepped out of the car, she rushed into my arms. I must admit, it felt comforting to have my youngest daughter back home. Dad opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase, which Eric promptly took up to her bedroom. The three of them then gathered in the family room so April could share about her new grandmother, allowing my parents and me a chance to catch up. We retreated to the kitchen where I brewed a fresh pot of coffee while my parents shared their impressions of Mrs. Beatrice Smith. "She seemed at peace when we left," Dad remarked. "It was as if she had come to terms with her impending pass-away. Meeting April and seeing her acceptance meant a lot to her." Mom pulled out a legal-size envelope from her purse and handed it to me, explaining, "This was given to me by her lawyer, per Beatrice's instructions." I opened it and found a letter, along with a check for $50,000. The letter was brief and straightforward. The grand lady thanked me for fulfilling her request, mentioning that she had already surpassed her expected lifespan before our contact. DNA had confirmed the biological connection, and she commended me for raising April well. She urged me to use the funds to navigate through the challenging times we were facing and to stay true to my values. I allowed my parents to read it, and we pondered the possibility that we had fulfilled someone's dying wish. Over coffee, I briefed them on everything that had occurred during their absence. I expressed my belief that the worst of the emotional turmoil for our family was behind us, and we could return to our normal routine starting the next day. The remainder of the week proceeded relatively smoothly, all things considered. Grace attempted to reach out to each of our children by phone, but was met with rejection. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters was pleased that I was no longer managing the sales meetings and began the search for a new sales manager for the first time in a decade. As I sat in my office reviewing monthly sales figures, Kathy entered, expressing concern about trouble brewing. I inquired about the issue, and she informed me that my recent letter to Grace had been posted online on the Southeastern Missouri newspaper's website. We quickly accessed the website's Speak Out section and found the letter. Kathy read it aloud, and I acknowledged that I had written it in a moment of emotional distress, wondering if I had been too harsh. Kathy disagreed, stating that the letter simply stated the reality of Grace's long-term behavior in a direct manner. She pointed out that either of them could have ended the affair and come clean, but Luke had enjoyed the benefits without bearing the costs. We discussed how rare it was for society to witness the consequences of someone's actions on a family in such a public manner. Kathy remarked that, as someone who had experienced divorce, it served as a stark reminder of the pain and suffering endured before finding solace. I then mentioned a comment on the website from a longtime feminist, highlighting how Grace and Luke's actions had tarnished the movement for equality and empowerment. Later, Grace and Luke sat at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Despite it typically being bustling on Friday nights, the place was unusually empty, with vacant tables surrounding them. When they inquired with the waitress, she explained that people were waiting but refused to be seen sitting near them in public, likely because they had read my recent letter to Grace on the newspaper's website. They swiftly requested the bill and departed, realizing they needed to lay low in public for the foreseeable future. Both were grappling with the reality that their actions had significantly restricted their social circle. As they exited, Grace spotted her parents seated at a nearby table, waiting for their order. She approached them, with Luke trailing behind. Upon hearing her voice, her father addressed them coldly. "Mr. Barrow, I suggest you remove your mistress from here and allow my wife and me to enjoy our meal in peace." Grace left the restaurant in tears, finally comprehending that there was no turning back once you crossed a certain line. She realized she would live with the consequences of her and Luke's actions for the rest of her life. Returning to Luke's place, they visited the website and saw firsthand the public's overwhelming disdain for both of them. Update. I sat in the passenger seat of my car observing April drive. We departed this morning for Wichita, Kansas upon learning of her grandmother Beatrice's passing. Heading to the airport to catch the private plane provided by the estate, April was deeply affected, having grown close to her grandmother through their frequent phone calls. Amy and Eric had been a tremendous help, bringing the four of us closer together. They were both urging me to start dating again, but I've been hesitant. Once bitten, twice shy. Meanwhile, Luke and Grace had relocated to St. Louis. Luke was allowed to start his job early by the feds, with the county eager to rid itself of him once he repaid over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They now resided in a two-bedroom rented apartment, preparing for the possibility of bankruptcy due to an impending civil lawsuit. According to Missouri bankruptcy laws, they could retain only $10,000 each in equity. Our divorce had been finalized according to state law, with Grace obligated to provide child support for our kids while they were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they resided on campus. The civil trial for fraud was set to begin in 2 weeks. My kids still refused to speak to their mother, and neither did her side of the family. She had learned the hard way that people will only tolerate so much before walking away forever. April had to endure a meeting arranged by the state's child services with her biological father, which did not go well. She informed him, in the presence of child services representatives, that both he and her mother were dead to her. We attended her grandmother's funeral, after which the lawyer disclosed the substantial inheritance left to us. Overwhelmed, April and I decided to sell her grandmother's home and its contents, except for personal jewelry and a few photos that April wanted. Upon returning home as the school year ended, I prepared for the first day of court on Wednesday when April entered the den. April asked if I could arrange a meeting with Luke, her mom, their lawyers, and Dale on Tuesday, expressing her desire for them to understand the real cost of their actions, an idea suggested by Grandma Beatrice. So I called Dale, and we arranged it. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Grace, and their lawyers. April explained that she requested the meeting to Luke, her biological father, handing him a sealed envelope containing his father's location and his request for him to visit him in jail, disclosing the circumstances of her conception. She revealed that her biological grandmother had left her over $100 million in a trust managed by her father, Edward Adams, until she turned 25, which would have been Luke's if she hadn't been discovered. She warned Luke and Grace of possible legal escalations, urging them to consider mediation before resorting to court. Leaving that meeting, I felt both proud and humbled. My daughter had spoken her truth. Whatever tomorrow held, today I had received the true blessing. Finished.